Chapter 429. Why do we have to fight? Yang Chendong tilted his head and asked after hearing Tiger's Mane's words. Tiger's Mane didn't know how to answer the young master's question. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't point at him to answer. Instead, he said slowly, young master's goal was to force Zhu Qizhen to bow his head. Isn't the appearance of these people the best time to do so? If we chase them away right away, the problem will be solved. How can we force them to bow? Yes, young master is right. Tiger's Mane is too naive. Tiger's Mane was smart. After being pointed out by Yang Chendong, he understood everything and immediately replied, it's good that you know. Pass down the order. The camp will be in a defensive formation. Without orders, no one is allowed to leave the camp. Also, inform the logistics to prepare enough food and be prepared for a long standoff. Yang Chendong knew that Tiger's Mane wasn't the only one who wanted to send out troops. He was afraid that all the officers would have the same idea. Thus, he passed down the order. Once a real and effective military order was formed, Lung Feng, who prioritized obeying orders, knew what to do. Just as Yang Chendong was passing down the order, Guanning came to the camp as a representative of Nanming. He wanted to meet Yang Chendong and invite him to Gaozhou Prefecture to avoid trouble. As expected, Guanning didn't even see Yang Chendong's face before Tiger's Mane sent him away. My young master's condition has worsened. He is not fit for any exercise. We appreciate Master Guan's kindness. We will stay here and guard the young master's body. When he recovers, we will leave. These words left Guanning speechless. He could only hope that after the Miao army arrived and failed to take down Gaozhou Prefecture, they would make an example out of these mercenaries. This way, they could just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Gaozhou Prefecture and Yang Chendong's troops had all made defensive preparations. 3 days later, Miao Jinlong's 80,000 soldiers finally appeared in the southwest. Miao Jinlong was from the Miao tribe and was born in a big family. He had practiced martial arts since he was young and was familiar with the art of war. He had also seen many instances of the Ming dynasty's army bullying the Miao people. He had always wanted to fight for the rights of the Miao people one day and hold his head high. However, the great Ming dynasty was too powerful. How could the Miao tribe, who had a weak population and territory, contend against them? He originally thought that this was just a childhood dream that he would never be able to realize in his lifetime. But who knew that the situation changed so quickly? The prosperous great Ming dynasty was divided into two. Then the king of Min raised his army. Miao Jinlong, who had been waiting, knew that the opportunity had come. He rose in revolt and became the first group of people in the Miao tribe to support the king of Min. He expressed his stance early and took practical actions. After a while, he gained the favor of the king of Min Miao Jinlong, who was conferred the title of Marquis, led 10,000 Miao soldiers, and was unstoppable. After winning every battle, the army grew stronger and stronger. Now, they had 80,000 soldiers and became a very important force in the king of Min's faction. Some things, if you don't do it, you won't know. Maybe it was because he'd been trapped in the Miao tribe for a long time. Miao Jinlong had always thought highly of the Ming dynasty. However, along the way, he did not meet any opponents. Often, when the army arrived, the city would fall by itself. Countless gold, silver, treasures, land, and beauties were at his fingertips. He finally saw what was called a real life, what was called a life of enjoyment. He also saw how the Ming dynasty, which was praised by others, could not withstand a single blow. After experiencing more, his horizons were broadened. Naturally, his heart grew bigger. Just as the king of Min's main force was still consolidating and absorbing the fruits of victory, Miao Jinlong could no longer hold back. After asking for instructions, he led the 80,000 soldiers and started a sweep through the entire Guangdong. Attacking the Lianzhou prefecture was just the beginning. His goal was to enter Gaozhou, Laizhou, Guanghai guards, and the southwest of the Guangzhou prefecture from Lianzhou. He wanted to be the vanguard to cooperate with the king of Min's main force to attack the Guangzhou prefecture. Lianzhou won the battle, and the Lianzhou general surrendered and opened the city. This seemed to be a good start. Miao Jinlong was overjoyed and led his troops to seize the city for a day. On the second day, he went straight to Gaozhou Prefecture. In his eyes, Guang Prefecture was the only place to rest. The other prefectures were just steps to wealth and power. It was because of this idea that when the troops arrived at the Gaozhou Prefecture, he sent people, as usual, to persuade them to surrender. The people were sent out, but only corpses returned. Guaning was ordered to kill the messenger with an arrow. This is so infuriating. How dare you kill the messenger? Men surround the city, attack the city. When Miao Jinlong saw the messenger's corpse, he could not help but be furious. He immediately ordered to prepare to attack the city. "My king, please calm down." Just as the other generals in the tent were enraged and were about to fight to be the vanguard, a voice rang out in the tent. Then, a man dressed in a long gown and dressed like a scholar walked out from the ranks. "Mr. Zhou." Seeing the person who walked out, Miao Jinlong furrowed his brows. Then, he relaxed and asked kindly, "Mister, why are you stopping me from sending troops?" "It is for the good of my king and all the generals." The man called Mr. Zhou said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Mr. Zhou's original name was Zoda. He was originally from Yunnan. Because he once offended a steward of the Marquis' sheeping house, he was stripped of his scholar status. In a fit of anger, he went to where the Miao people lived and married into their family, becoming the son-in-law of the Miao family. Because he was literate and knowledgeable, he was chosen by Miao Jinlong and kept by his side. Zoda was worthy of being called scholar. He had contributed a lot to Miao Jinlong's plan along the way. Even when the Min King sent people to contact them, he was the first to stand up and support them. Zoda not only focused on attacking, but also on attacking the heart. It was because of this that when he attacked the Lianzhou house, he did not lose a single soldier and obtained a city. All of this made Miao Jinlong admire him. In addition, this person had been in the Miao family for 10 years and even had a few children. There was no problem with his loyalty, and he was very trusted. When he saw that it was this person who stood out, he was not angry. Instead, he asked kindly, "Let's hear it." Hearing that it was for his own good, Miao Jinlong asked with interest. Facing Miao Jinlong's amiable attitude and the angry expressions of the other generals, Zoda was neither servile nor overbearing. With a calm expression, he said, "My king, generals, you must remember that our ally in Guangdong, Huang Yuliang, was completely wiped out, right?" "Of course." Miao Jinlong nodded his head. Due to his identity, he had never met young Master Huang or even his messenger. However, he knew that they had an ally in Guangdong. It was because of this ally that they were able to reduce the pressure on them in Yunnan, allowing them to achieve great things. Then do you know why young Master Huang was defeated? Let me tell you, he was defeated by the Ming army in front of you. Zoda said with a very firm tone. The reason he knew this was mainly because he was good at gathering information. He was not like the ordinary Miao soldiers who only knew how to fight and fight. There was such a thing? Miao Jinlong, who was originally curious about what Zoda would say, could not help but change his expression when he heard this. He finally understood why Zoda did not agree to him attacking the city. So what if there is? Miao Jinlong did not speak, but did not mean that his generals were afraid of anything. Among them, General Zhang Tsang said with a fearless tone, "That only proves that young Master Huang is too weak. If it were our Miao soldiers, we would definitely make the Southern Ming army cry for their parents on the battlefield and know how powerful we are." That's right, that's right. After the other generals heard Zhang Tsing's words, they all agreed. During this period of time, they had dealt with and fought with the Southern Ming army. However, the facts proved that this was just an army that looked strong on the outside, but had ordinary combat strength. There was nothing to be afraid of. Huang Yuliang's defeat was definitely due to his own lack of strength. No, you are all wrong. Faced with the unanimous opinion of so many generals, Zoda refuted with the strength of a weak scholar. You all have only won a few battles, but you do not know that there is always someone stronger. Why don't you think about it? Since the Ming dynasty was able to conquer such a large country, how could they be weak? The reason why we aren't a match for them now is because our tempo is too fast. They weren't prepared and weren't able to adapt. However, once they are given enough time to deploy their troops, who can guarantee that we will continue to win? Not to mention, the ones who defeated young Master Huang weren't the Southern Ming Empire's army, but the most mysterious mercenaries that they spent a large sum of money to hire. Zoda did indeed understand a lot. This was also related to the education he received. It was precisely because he had read more books that he naturally had more knowledge and had more considerations. For example, studying the opponent was something that must be done. Mercenary army? When the generals heard this new name for the first time, they all looked at each other with a puzzled expression. Zoda did not expect them to understand anything. He only needed to tell them what he knew. As for what to do next, whether or not they had to continue attacking the city, it was not something that he could decide. Yes, it is the mercenary army. It was this army that once saved the life of the Southern Ming Emperor, Ingzong's life on the battlefield. It was also this army that defeated the Walla cavalry that wanted to enter the capital of Baiming. It was also this army that defeated young Master Huang, who was very influential in Guangdong. These are their achievements after they made their debut. He spoke truthfully about everything that he knew. Then, Zoda continued, "If we want to attack the city, we will definitely not be able to avoid them. How much confidence do we have? As for where to go, I asked my king and the generals to discuss this." Chapter 430. Zoda shut his mouth and did not want to argue with anyone about this matter. He was originally a Han Chinese, but because he was treated unfairly and could not survive, he came to the Miao tribe and became the son-in-law of the Miao tribe. A person like him actually had a very low social status. He couldn't even be considered the head of a family. How many people would think highly of him? If Miao Jinlong did not see that he did have some ability and put him in an important position, he would not be qualified to enter the tent for discussion, let alone argue with others. Zoda shut his mouth, which made the others unable to find an object to argue with for a while. They all looked at King Miao Jinlong. The Miao tribe also had a very strict hierarchy, especially when it came to major matters such as the deployment of troops on the battlefield. The king's order was the final order. Everyone's eyes were on him, which made Miao Jinlong silent. Although it seemed that the journey was very smooth, and the army was also growing step by step, from the original 10,000 people to the current 80,000 people, it was a strong army. However, no one knew better than Miao Jinlong about his own strength. The so-called expansion of the army was just these soldiers who were forced to join. Most of them joined the army to fill their stomachs, unlike the Miao family that he led in the beginning. They were born to conquer the world and be proud of the heroes. They did not even have a goal. Such an army could only fight a smooth battle. Once they encountered a tough opponent, they were likely to be heavily injured or even defeated. It was possible that they could lose their lives. The great Ming dynasty could occupy the world until now. If it was said that they did not have a capable army, even Miao Jinlong himself would not believe it. Just like now, didn't they encounter one? A head-on clash was far from what he wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be underworld. This saying was also applicable in the army. For any organization, no matter what the intention was, as long as time passed, factions would appear. It was something that could not be stopped. Unless the system was very strict, if there was a great soul leading the army, these problems could be suppressed. Just like the king of Min's faction now. Everyone treated the king of Min as the core, but it was undeniable that which general did not have their own thoughts. If you want to be respected by others, if you want to share the benefits, the prerequisite is to have enough strength. Only then will others respect you, value you, and not neglect you. How to expand their own strength while winning the battle, or at least to preserve their own strength, became the most important thing in the eyes of the kings. If everything was as Zoda said, and the Ming army in front of them and the mercenaries in front of them were very powerful, then choosing such a tough opponent was originally an unwise thing. What was the meaning of winning if they used up all their forces and severely injured the enemy? It was just making a wedding dress for others. It was because of this desire to preserve their strength that Miao Jinlong listened to Zoda's words. He then said to the generals looking at him, Forget it. Since the Ming army in front of us is not so easy to deal with, we do not need to make too many sacrifices. We will just surround them and wait for their morale to drop and surrender. How about this? We will first move out of Lijiao Prefecture and take the nearby cities. General Zhangzong, listen up. I will give you 10,000 troops. Go around Gaozhou Prefecture and take Lijiao City. Remember, if the Ming army does not take the initiative to stop you, do not casually provoke them. Think about the big picture, understand? Miao Jinlong finally gave the order. He listened to Zoda's suggestion and did not take a head-on approach. Instead, he only surrounded the city and lowered the enemy's morale first. Then, he would have the opportunity to take Gaozhou Prefecture without bloodshed and complete his strategic mission. After the king gave the order, General Zhang Tseng stepped out to receive it. Not long after, the 10,000 Miao family soldiers rushed out of the camp and went around the border of Gaozhou Prefecture, heading straight for Lijiao Prefecture in the south. After the Miao army arrived, they did not immediately attack the city. Instead, they acted as if they were going to surround the city. This caused General Yu Guang, who had already prepared to defend Gaozhou City, to be puzzled. However, he soon found out from General Wei that it was probably because the enemy was afraid of the mercenaries. Yu Guang was still thinking about how powerful the mercenaries were. Just their name alone was enough to scare people into not daring to make a move. The Miao army actually started to move again. They went straight from Gaozhou Prefecture to the mercenaries' camp 5 li south. Don't tell me they want to attack the mercenaries first, but it seems like they only have 10,000 troops. Is that even useful? The deputy general beside Yu Guang voiced out his doubts while revealing an expression of disbelief. Idiot, they are probably going to attack Lijiao Prefecture. Yu Guang glared at the deputy general beside him with an expression that said, "You are really stupid." Then, he quickly sent someone to report this news to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was waiting in the government office. 5 li south of Gaozhou Prefecture, the mercenaries' camp. When the scouts noticed that the Miao army was moving towards their camp, they quickly reported it. Tiger's Mane did not dare to delay after hearing the news. He ordered Luo Pa and the others to prepare for battle while rushing to the large tent where the young master was resting. At this moment, Yang Qindong was very satisfied. He was enjoying the fruits that the 2 ladies fed him. If he wanted to eat bananas, he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. If he wanted to eat grapes, he would have them washed and delivered to his mouth. Even if he wanted to eat apples, he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. With beauties by his side and delicious food in front of him, Yang Qindong could not help but feel like he was not thinking about the world anymore. Fortunately, in his previous life, in order to complete all kinds of missions, he had taken on all kinds of roles. In order to complete the missions, he had to act like he was. He could really endure hardships and enjoy blessings. Everything in front of him was just child's play. He could not lose Yang Qindong's nature. Outside the large tent, hurried footsteps could be heard, followed by Tiger's Mane's anxious voice. "Young master, the Miao army is moving. They are rushing towards our direction." Although his voice was a little hurried, he was not panicked. It was obvious that Yang Qindong had already prepared for this kind of situation. It was very simple. If someone attacked, then they just had to fight back. After Tiger's Mane reported, he respectfully stood in place. After a few breaths of time, the large tent was opened from the inside. Yang Qindong, dressed in green, walked out with a serious expression. "Let's go. We'll go take a look at this Miao army." The intelligence had described the Miao people and the Miao army more than once, but he had never seen them with his own eyes. With the idea of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy, Yang Qindong decided to personally take a look. The Miao army was indeed heading straight for the mercenaries' camp. When they were only 2 li away, they suddenly turned and passed by. This obviously provocative action caused many of the cold vanguard soldiers who had already gripped their spears to glare angrily. Some of the soldiers even turned their heads to look at the platoon leaders and company commanders beside them. Their intention to fight was very obvious. Ever since the mercenaries were established, they had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. What the people of the great Ming dynasty knew was that they first saved Emperor Yingzong on a battlefield, then defeated Walla's elite cavalry, then fought bravely against the Huang bandits, and quelled the rebellion in Guangdong. Each and every one of them had the aura of being invincible the moment Lung Feng was unleashed. How could such a proud army allow others to provoke them? Keep your eyes on the target. Without orders, no one is to act rashly. Otherwise, prepare to retire early. The company commanders and platoon leaders who were being stared at by those cold gazes naturally felt the pressure. They were extremely dissatisfied, but it was the duty of a soldier to obey orders. This was especially true for those who joined the cold front. Obeying orders was an extremely important task for them. Even if there were no orders from above, they could not evade the enemy's spear, even if it pierced their chest. This was the most basic requirement to become an iron army, a strong army. Without orders to attack, the cold front, including some of the auxiliary soldiers who were ready for the second attack, could only watch as the 10,000-strong Miao army brushed past them. Speaking of which, the distance between the two sides was only about 300 meters. Those with good eyesight could even see the facial features of the other side. Therefore, they could see the mocking gazes of the Miao soldiers. General, it seems like these so-called mercenaries are nothing more than this. We are already so close to them, but I don't see a single brave soldier daring to rush out of the camp to find trouble with us. It seems like they don't live up to their name. Some of the junior leaders in the Miao army gathered together and laughed. General Zhang Zeng, who was riding on a horse and walking in the middle of the group, also laughed when he heard the discussion of his subordinates. That's right, they don't even have the courage to walk out of the camp. In my eyes, they're just a bunch of cowards. Once we take down Lizhou Prefecture, I will naturally tell the king to start with these mercenaries. Ha! I want to see what that scholar Zhou has to say when the time comes. General, you're wise. The group of junior leaders hurriedly flattered. Following that, the 10,000-strong Miao soldiers walked past the mercenaries' camp with high morale. Each of them seemed to walk with their heads held high, as if they were extremely arrogant. Young master, it seems like they don't have any intentions of attacking us. They're going to Lizhou Prefecture. However, there is no one there. The city is also empty. What are they going to do there? Hu Mang watched as the 10,000 Miao soldiers walked past the front of the military camp. After walking for 2 hours in a grandiose manner, he saw through their purpose. Chapter 431. Hearing Tiger's Mane's puzzled question, Yang Qindong nodded and said, "Yes, we know that Lizhou Prefecture is an empty city, but others don't know that. What will they do when they find out that there is no one there?" Tiger's Mane was originally listening to Yang Qindong's words, but when there was suddenly no more, he asked in confusion, "What do we do?" "Yes, what do we do?" "This young master is asking you a question." Yang Qindong nodded and looked at Tiger's Mane seriously. "This?" Tiger's Mane saw that Yang Qindong was testing him, so he quickly racked his brains. However, perhaps because of the suddenness of the situation, or perhaps because of his nervousness, he couldn't come up with a reason. He could only stammer, "Young master, Tiger's Mane is slow-witted. He doesn't know what will happen next." Sigh. A long sigh with disappointment in his eyes. Tiger's Mane was good at everything, but he was used to relying on himself. How could he be entrusted with important tasks in the future? The good thing was that he liked Tiger's loyalty and complete obedience to orders. As for his shortcomings, he would become stronger with more practice. "All right, then young master will tell you. When I looked at the Miao army just now, they were very arrogant, as if they didn't put us or any other army in their eyes. Usually, such an army's morale is very high, and they won't be too weak in battle. However, they often have a fatal flaw, and that is arrogance. On the battlefield, if they are too arrogant and don't put their opponents in their eyes, the consequences will be very serious, and they may even lose their lives." Yang Qindong's voice was still echoing in the air. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Luo, Pa, and the other regiment and battalion officers all had a thoughtful expression on their faces. They also seemed to be wondering if their own army was too arrogant. Would they also make the mistake of underestimating the enemy? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yang Qindong's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. It was almost impossible for an army to remain undefeated for its entire life. There were too many factors involved, such as morale, willpower, advanced weapons, whether the commanding general gave the correct orders, whether the soldiers were united, whether they were brave, whether they dared to risk their lives on the battlefield, and even factors such as the right time, location, people, whether they had a good reason for their actions, whether they were righteous, whether the army had a soul, whether the soldiers had faith, whether the soldiers were of the same mind, and so on and so forth. It could be said that victory in this war was not determined by who had more people or whose weapons were more advanced. It was just like during the War's War, of course. Our armies is main, was main, was main's main. This was his main, was main, main. The cold front had too many advantages. For example, their advanced weapons, strict training, strict military laws, and uniform thinking and behavior among the soldiers. However, this did not mean that every battle could be won. Changes were ever present. How to deal with and resolve these sudden changes was also the key to victory. Beating them down was even more necessary. A person could have a lofty and unyielding character, but he couldn't have an arrogant heart. Otherwise, he would fall sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. Using today's opportunity, Yang Qindong was knocking on the heads of the various regimental and battalion-level officers. Seeing that everyone was deep in thought and understood his intentions, he continued, "A proud army will never return empty-handed." However, an operation without a goal or plan was often the cause of failure. Take this 10,000 Miao army, for example. If they return empty-handed after going to Lijiao Prefecture and reunite with the Miao army's main force, then even if they fail, they will not be at fault. On the other hand, if their arrogance is at play and they want to take something back to deal with us, then their calculations will be wrong and the consequences will be very serious. Young master, are you saying that when the Miao army returns empty-handed, they will attack us? But isn't that a little too bold? Tiger's Mane finally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words and asked with a face of disbelief. These words came from Yang Qindong's mouth. If it was anyone else, Tiger's Mane would not have believed it and would even say that the other party was just trying to scare them. Are you brave? Ever since they left Yunnan, they have not met any opponents. How can such an army not be proud? What's so strange about them making some bold moves? Yang Qindong said all of this confidently. He only needed to confirm that the 10,000 Miao army would definitely attack them. Since Yang Qindong had said so, Tiger's Mane immediately said excitedly, "Young master, then let's prepare properly and teach them a lesson when they come." Yes, preparation is a must. However, there's no need to be too nervous. Didn't Gao Xiong bring some newly developed mines from the munitions factory when he came? Bury some of them. If they dare to come, let them know what it means to scatter flowers from heaven. Yang Qindong was not completely sure that the 10,000 Miao army would attack them. Before he had any definite information, there was no need to make the soldiers so nervous. All he needed to do was to bury the mines and prepare for defense. If they really came, the effect would be surprisingly good. When the Lungfeng army attacked together, the 10,000 Miao army would basically be useless. Yes, Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Lungfeng army, Luo Pa, who had been standing at the side for a long time, immediately nodded in agreement. Then, he watched as the young master left. However, they did not leave even after a long time. Instead, after Luo Pa and political commissar Kong Jia had a discussion, they decided to pass on Yang Qindong's words to every battalion, company, and platoon leader. They wanted to let them know that it was okay to have pride, but having pride would easily lead to failure. At the same time, they also discussed some actions that might be needed to take in the upcoming events. Since the six young masters said that the Miao army would attack them, because of their victory, it did not matter if it would happen or not. The necessary preparations must be made. Previously, when Gao Xiong brought a ship to Laizhou Prefecture to pick them up, he brought a lot of guns, ammunition, and crossbows. Now, they were all equipped and brought into the army. Every Lung Feng army was also equipped with 5 bullets. It was enough to deal with some large battles. However, no one knew what would happen next. No one knew when the next replenishment of ammunition would be. In order to ensure that there was enough ammunition, Luo suggested that unless absolutely necessary, it was best to use cold weapons first. This was perhaps the Lung Feng army's weakness. Without air transportation, or even ground transportation, ammunition became a huge problem. Even if Yang Qindong was around and they could retrieve the items from the warehouse at any time, they couldn't do such a thing unless it was absolutely necessary. It wasn't like they could find a good excuse every time something happened, not to mention that there was only one Yang Qindong, but there was more than one coal front team now. Political Commissar Kong Jie agreed with Luo Po's suggestion, and the Lung Feng army began to get busy. First, they dug the mines. In order to prevent others from seeing them, they worked in the dark. At the same time, other than Lung Feng Wushang's 4 companies of the 1st Battalion who were still using advanced firearms, the other 2 battalions' 8 companies, a total of 800 Lung Feng soldiers, also took out their sharp bayonets and prepared for close combat. Using the words of 2nd Battalion Commander Chan Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin, they wanted to show the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers that even in the face of cold weapons, the valiance of the cold front was unrivaled. Southern Ming capital, Nanjing Prefecture. Kuang Yi rushed all the way here and finally placed it in front of Zhu Qizhen's dragon desk. When he heard what Kuang Yi said, that Miao Jinlong and his army of 80,000 had started to head south, and after taking over the Lianzhou Prefecture, they headed straight for the Gaozhou Prefecture, Zhu Qizhen could no longer remain calm. According to his thoughts and the analysis of some of the court officials, Min Min had already taken over Min Min. The king of Min had just obtained most of the territories in Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong. It was time to stop and digest them. At least in the short term, there should not be any military action. However, it seemed that they had underestimated the enemy's appetite and ambition. In the court, when the officials heard the news, they all panicked, especially the newly appointed left assistant minister, Chun Ruyan. He was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Kuang Yi was not in court. The former left assistant minister Wang Ji had misjudged the situation and had been arrested and interrogated. However, because he was still in Shiping Manor in Yunnan, and because the road back was full of King of Min's rebel army, he was not immediately taken back to Jingdo for interrogation. With the loss of 2 important figures, Chun Ruyan was promoted to the position of left assistant minister and also to manage the affairs of the Ministry of War. Normally, Chun Ruyan would be overjoyed to receive such a position. However, in such a dangerous situation, taking over the Ministry of War was like taking over a mess. How could he not be frustrated? Luckily, Chun Ruyan was quite capable. In fact, in history, he had once held the position of Minister of War. Even if the situation was a little dangerous, with his strong ability, he had come up with some good countermeasures. For example, when the entire Southern Ming dynasty started to recruit soldiers, any male between 16 and 40 years old could sign up. The requirement was that each family had to send 1 person. If there were more and they were willing to join the army, 1 person could pay a year's worth of taxes. Once the world was peaceful, these people would not be recorded in the army and could regain their freedom. They could choose to do farming or business. Chapter 432. Chun Ruyan's policy was very good, and it attracted a large number of people to join the army. Statistics showed that the newly recruited soldiers in the Southern Ming Empire had reached 1 million. This was because the financial pressure of the Ministry of Revenue was too great. Otherwise, it would not be difficult to double this number. This was the benefit of having a strong foundation. It had to be said that the Great Ming Empire was still very powerful. If it was not for the appearance of Yang Chendong, it would be like history. It would not be a big problem to continue for a few hundred years. The actions of the Ministry of Military Personnel were seen by Zhu Qizhen of Yingzhong, and he praised them twice. Now, they only needed to wait for the training of these recruits to be completed before they could enter the battlefield. With so many fresh troops, it would not be a problem to wipe out the king of Min's rebel army. But this time, the king of Min's faction, who was estimated to be biding their time, made a move. If they could not be effectively controlled, it would not take long for them to reach out for a yard after getting an inch. The other rebel army would follow suit. It was afraid that before the training of the recruits was completed, the king of Min's faction would kill their way to the front of Nanjing Prefecture. The Southern Ming Empire's regime might face the danger of ending. With the danger of the country being destroyed, how could Zhu Qizhen not be anxious? With a trace of blood in his eyes, he looked at the officials in the court. Dear officials, is there any way to control the situation? It doesn't need too long. It can last for a year. No, 9 months is enough. Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously, but what he got was silence. These officials could usually speak some reason or even twisted reason when they encounter problems. In the face of military affairs, the officials now had a very good interpretation of what it meant to be a scholar meeting a soldier. In the face of the king of Min's faction, who did not talk reason at all, it seemed that any method was useless. Just like 2 days ago, the Minister of Rights, Lu De, had proposed that they should first negotiate with the king of Min. Of course, this kind of negotiation was fake. The real thing was to stabilize the situation and delay time. Although this policy made Zhu Qizhen somewhat unhappy, considering that it could maintain the situation and buy more time to prepare, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But who would have thought that when Lu De solemnly arranged for someone to do this, the envoy sent out a firm refusal before he even arrived in front of Prince of Min? Under such favorable circumstances, with the cooperation of Jiaoji and Miao Jun, only a fool would agree to sit down and negotiate with the Southern Ming Empire. The standard of negotiation was that everyone's strength was equal and no one could do anything to the other. Only then could such a method be used. When one party's power was too great, it would be difficult to negotiate. It was precisely because the method had already been tried that all of the officials shut their mouths, looking as if they were unable to come up with a solution. In fact, it wasn't that there was no way. At least, there were 2 paths in front of Zhu Qizhen. First, they had to take the initiative to submit to Baiming, and then cede a few provinces in a peaceful situation. This way, they would be able to obtain the help of Zhu Qiyu, the acting head of Baiming. Then he could borrow troops to destroy the king of Min's faction. Second, they had to agree to Kuang Ye's condition of giving Yang Chendong the throne. This way, as long as the mercenaries were willing to help, even if they couldn't immediately suppress the king of Min's rebellion, they could buy enough time. After the training of the new recruits was completed, the Southern Ming Empire would be at peace. However, Zhu Qizhen didn't want to choose the first of these 2 paths. His cousin had seized the throne while the other party was in a precarious position. This had already made him very unhappy. If Yang Shan had not suddenly disobeyed him and disappeared, he would not have acknowledged the fact that the other party was Emperor Baiming even now. If he lowered his head now, wouldn't it prove that he was inferior to the other party? If that was the case, people who didn't know the situation would think that the other party was the legitimate one. This was definitely not what Zhu Qizhen wanted to see. Even now, he still wanted to kill his way to the Southern Ming Empire and unify the Great Ming Empire. Wouldn't this be his own goal and hope? As for the second point, Zhu Qizhen also didn't want to give Yang Chendong the title of king with a different surname. Yang Chendong was really too outstanding. He was so outstanding that Zhu Qizhen was very afraid of him. If taking the first path was to end one's own future goal, then choosing the second path was to end one's own grave. Yang Chendong was only 21 years old, and he was already given the title of king with a different surname. If he still needed him in the future, how would he reward him? Could it be that he had to give up the throne? Moreover, once he was given the title of king with a different surname, it would easily create a situation where he couldn't get rid of his subordinates. If he wanted to solve this problem in the future, he didn't know how much he would have to pay. As for what the genie guard said about Yang Shandong's poor health and being poisoned, Zhu Qijin didn't dare to fully believe it. Yang Shandong had given him too many surprises, so it was reasonable that he couldn't fully believe it. This led to the gathering of the ministers, wanting to see if any of them could come up with a better idea. But now, Zhu Qijin was somewhat disappointed. Incompetent, incompetent, he cursed in his heart. Zhu Qijin had to choose the lesser of two evils. It was time for him to make a decision. In the end, his heart was biased toward the second choice. Forget it in the court. The 6 ministers and the imperial censors stay behind to discuss matters in the side hall. Zhu Qijin called the several important officials to the side hall. Naturally, there was only one matter, and that was to discuss the matter of giving Yang Shandong the title of king. Since no one could think of a better idea, they could only consider this matter. Fortunately, Mu Bin had been given the title of king with a different surname before. This wasn't the first time he had done such a thing. In other words, it wasn't the first time he had lost face. So what if it happened again? Those who could become important officials were all quick-witted and good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to keep their positions. When Zhu Qijin summoned them, they all guessed the emperor's intention. So when they entered the side hall, they all lowered their heads and didn't speak. Obviously, no one wanted to mention this matter first to avoid tarnishing their reputation. Cough. Sitting on the golden dragon throne, Zhu Qijin's expression was a bit ugly. Seeing that no one spoke, he coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention. But in the eyes of the ministers who had weathered countless storms, this was completely useless. Even the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, Chen Ruyan, who represented Kuang Yi, lowered his head in silence. It was as if there was a beautiful scenery under his feet. He couldn't move his eyes or raise them at all. Seeing everyone's reaction, Zhu Qijin was displeased. Although he knew that whoever spoke of this matter would be looked down upon in the history books, someone had to do it. Could it be that he, the emperor, had to do it himself? Did he think that what he did in the history books wasn't shameful enough? The emperor was the emperor. Since the officials didn't take the initiative to speak, he would call them out one by one. He thought, "You forced me to do this." When Zhu Qijin spoke, the first person he called out was the Minister of History, Chen Sun. Beloved official Chen, as the Minister of Personnel, you should have a reputation for discerning people. Is there any way to resolve the current situation? Since ancient times, the Ministry of Personnel had a saying that officials were one level higher than officials. As the Minister of Personnel, who was in charge of the promotion, evaluation, and recommendation of officials, he was often described as the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. Usually, as long as he had enough experience, he would be the leader of the officials. Immediately calling out Chen Sun's name showed that he didn't have any intention of picking on the weak. He was really forcing everyone to state their position. Especially when he said that he had a reputation for discerning people, Chen Sun couldn't refuse. This also made Minister Chen, who was standing there, suffer. Although Zhu Qijin's words were gentle, if one carefully thought about the meaning behind them, as long as one wasn't a fool, one could sense the threat. Perhaps Zhu Qijin was giving the officials a choice. Either they said what he wanted to say, or they could only accept some infamy, or they could take it head-on and be prepared to lose their position. One was fame, and the other was benefits. They had to choose one. They couldn't take all the benefits. Chen Sun's expression was very ugly. He was in a complicated struggle, considering what to do. What to say? What kind of gains and losses would there be? Your Majesty, this official has something to say. Just as Chen Sun was thinking about how to respond to the emperor, the Minister of Rites, Lu De, finally spoke. He held his ceremonial tablet and took a step forward. Originally, Zhu Qijin was about to get angry and give Chen Sun a good beating. He might even find a reason to remove him from his position. However, Lu De suddenly stood up. This made Zhu Qijin happy. Thinking that he still had loyal officials by his side, he did his best to make his expression as good as possible. Beloved official Lu, what do you have to say? Yes, Your Majesty. Lu De nodded and lowered his cupped hands. Then, with a calm gaze, he said, "Your Majesty, the situation in the southwest is chaotic. It's about to spread. Our army still needs some time to train. As the saying goes, distant water can't quench a present thirst. In this official's opinion, it's better to appoint a king with a different surname and have him lead the army in battle to protect the great Ming's future." Not only did Lu De stand up, but he also took the initiative to talk about the appointment of a king. This made Zhu Qizhen very happy. "Beloved official Lu's words are very much to our liking. Many thanks, Your Majesty." After Lu De received the praise, he quickly put on a humble appearance. Then, he continued, "It's just that the appointment of a king is a big matter. In this official's opinion, we must not be rash, especially the Duke of Loyalty. He once served Baiming Dai's zone. Now, his family is also there. For such a big matter, we must first discuss it with him. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we won't be recognized by everyone in the world, and it will be easier for trouble to arise." Hearing Lu De's sudden new question, Zhu Qizhen nodded thoughtfully and said, "Beloved official Lu's words are very reasonable. Then, in your opinion, what should be the explanation?" "Your Majesty, we should first send someone to discuss this matter with Dai Zone. As long as both sides reach a consensus, the appointment of a king with a different surname can be carried out and the people of the world won't talk about it. Therefore, this official is willing to ask Your Majesty to give the Ministry of Rights some time. This official will immediately send someone to do it. As for the Duke of Loyalty, we can first notify him to lead the army to retreat. After he resolves the rebellion, presumably the matter of the appointment of a king will be settled. It'll be a good time to confer the title. This way, both sides won't be delayed." Chapter 433. It was as if Lu De had already thought of a countermeasure. As he spoke without hesitation. When the conditions were right, success would come naturally. "That's true." Zhu Qizhen nodded after Lu De's explanation. However, a few more questions popped up. He couldn't help but ask, "If that's the case, will the Duke of Zhongdan be willing? Also, how confident are you in convincing Baiming?" In Zhu Qizhen's opinion, they couldn't truly be bestowed the title of king. What if Yang Qindong didn't agree? Also, the Southern Ming Empire had no choice but to be bestowed the title of king. Baiming wouldn't suffer any losses. Would they be willing to admit it? At the very least, if it was him, he probably wouldn't agree. For example, Yang Qindong was the Duke of Zhongdan. Even now, Baiming's officials still referred to him as the Duke of Zhongdan. Since Lu De had stood up and made such a suggestion, it was natural that he had thought about these problems long ago. When he heard Zhu Qizhen's question, he smiled and said, "Your Majesty, there's no need to worry. Since Your Majesty has already bestowed the title, if the Duke of Zhongdan isn't satisfied, once the news spreads, I'm afraid everyone will rise up and criticize him. Sometimes, spittle can drown people. I'm sure the Duke of Zhongdan knows this very well. As for whether Baiming will agree or not, Your Majesty, that's not a problem we need to consider. If they don't agree, you can tell the Duke of Zhongdan and let him deal with it. In short, Your Majesty is wise." Lu De didn't say what if. However, Zhu Qizhen already understood. If Baiming didn't approve of the title of king, Yang Qindong would definitely be very angry. This was a good opportunity to drive a wedge between them. If things didn't go well, it was possible for both sides to fight. At that time, he would really be able to reap the benefits. Thinking that if Yang Qindong and Baiming were to fight to the death, it would be a chance for the South Ming Empire to rise again. Immediately, his face lit up with joy as he said, "Beloved official Lu is indeed worthy of being this subject's backbone. Good. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Chao Jixiang, draft a decree for me." Originally, he was still having a headache over the fact that he had to confer another king with a different surname. This was equivalent to selling the country of his ancestors. Even if one day he became strong again and took everything back, who knew how the history books would record this matter, and whether the future generations would scold him. But after hearing Lu De's words, the bad thing became a good thing. He didn't need to pay any price to solve the problem. He even made a strong enemy for Biming. Such a brilliant plan made him very satisfied. Now that Zhu Qizhen was satisfied, the ministers were free to leave. As Luda walked among them, he could clearly see that the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhe, was looking at him with disdain. Yang Shindong had once saved Wang Zhe's life on the battlefield. This was something that everyone knew. A while ago, Yang Shindong and Luda had quarreled over the matter of Hangzhou's prefectural magistrate, Shinbuki. This was something that everyone knew. Just from this aspect alone, the two of them already disliked each other. However, this was not the main problem. The main problem was that Luda's words today were clearly plotting against Yang Shindong. Even though there were only a few important ministers present, today's conversation would definitely be recorded in the history books. Presumably, Zhu Qizhen would be the first to speak of this matter, so as to prevent the future generations from placing such a scheme on him. In this way, the matter of Luda plotting against Yang Shindong would naturally be spread soon. At that time, given the personality of the Duke of loyalty and courage, would he forgive Luda? This was why there was a trace of disdain in Wang Zhe's eyes when he looked at him. In his opinion, if he wanted to use Yang Shindong, he should use him well. He should use his emotions and reason with him. There is no need to worry that he would not do his best for the imperial court and the South Ming Empire. After all, from Wang Zhe's point of view, Yang Shindong was still a minister of the Great Ming Empire. It was just a coincidence that he met the mercenaries. However, if he was plotted against like this, it would be a different story. The consequences would be very serious. Wang Zhe's gaze towards Luda was somewhat complicated, even somewhat disdainful. However, there was also someone who looked at him with gratitude. That was the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun. Just now, if Luda had not spoken up in time, he would have either left a mark on the history books and be criticized by others, or he would have been hated by the emperor. He did not know what kind of end he would end up in. Luda's words could be considered to have saved his life at a crucial time. Thank you, Brother Lu. Chen Sun clasped his hands gratefully. While he was speaking, the Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, and the Minister of Works, Jiang Yuan, also walked over. Luda knew how to conduct himself. Among the 6 ministers, he had united 3 of them. They were Chen Sun, Xiao Chua, and Jiang Yuan. Originally, he wanted to pull Imperial Censor Shang Lu into their camp. However, the position of Imperial Censor was too important. He had the responsibility of supervising hundreds of officials. Such a position meant that he could not participate in other people's camps. Otherwise, he would definitely be suspected by the emperor. He would not be far from being dismissed or even punished. In other words, among the 6 ministers, other than Minister Kuang Yi of the Ministry of War and Minister Wang Zhe of the Ministry of Revenue, the other 4 ministers had already formed a group. Coincidentally, these 4 ministers did not have any close relationship with Yang Shindong. On the contrary, because of Luda, there was some estrangement between them. Everyone saw what happened just now. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan saw how Luda spoke up to save Chen Sun at the crucial moment. They admired Luda for being fearless and not caring about his reputation. Now, they walked over to express their goodwill. Luda naturally noticed the approach of these 2 people and immediately had a plan in mind. He chuckled and said, "Brother Chun, what are you talking about? We are originally one. It could be said that when one person's glory, everyone's glory. When one person's loss, everyone's loss. This is what I should do." Good, well said. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan could not help but nod to express their appreciation. Because of this, the friendship between the 4 of them seemed to have become even closer. It was obvious that with them around, Yang Shindong's wish to be conferred the title of king would be very difficult. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture City. It had been 5 days since Miao Jun passed through here. At noon on this day, the scouts from Lung Feng reported that the 10,000 Miao soldiers had returned. They would most likely pass by Lung Feng's camp in the evening. When the news spread, many people in Lung Feng's camp were eager to show off their skills. Now, they only hoped that Miao Jun would impulsively attack the mercenaries and give them a chance to show off. Just as Yang Shindong expected, General Zhang Tsung, who led the team on the way back, had been considering whether to attack the mercenaries or not. Originally, they had vowed to attack Lijiao Prefecture City, wanting to break through and achieve great merit. However, he never thought that when he really went there, he would see an empty city. Not only that, they did not see anything valuable in the city. This meant that they had returned without achieving anything. This made Zhang Tsung, who had finally managed to get this job, feel depressed. Since the day of Miao Jun's uprising, he had been sweeping away everything in his path as if he had entered a no man's land. Whenever he encountered an enemy, it was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. When had there ever been a time like this where he had mobilized so many people, yet there was not even the slightest bit of gain? If they went back like this, they would probably be laughed at by their colleagues. No, we definitely cannot go back like this, Zhang Tsung said in his heart. However, if he wanted to return with great merit, it seemed that he could only choose to attack the mercenaries. Scholar Zhou's words cannot be completely trusted. He is originally a Han Chinese, a citizen of the great Ming dynasty, who knows what he is thinking. Before he decided to take action, Zhang Tsung convinced himself in his heart. Then, he sent out scouts to check on the situation of the mercenary camp with the excuse of going back to report the news. Zhang Tsung was quite careful. At least he knew to observe the situation before taking action. Thus, the scouts he sent out openly passed by the mercenaries' camp and headed towards the Miao army's main camp in Gaozhou Prefecture City. Originally, the defense of Lung Feng's camp had always been very strict. Usually, one could see squads of soldiers patrolling back and forth. However, ever since they used the night to plant mines outside the camp, they naturally relaxed a lot. This time, in order to lure the enemy to attack, they purposely relaxed on the outside but tightened on the inside. Wherever outsiders could see, the soldiers would appear very lazy. However, in the depths of the camp where no one could see, the training was still very strict. In this way, the Miao army scouts who seemed to be passing by but were actually investigating the situation fell for the trap and reported the mercenaries' performance to Zhang Tsung. Hearing that the mercenaries were so careless, Zhang Tsung was overjoyed. He felt that this was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens. He immediately sent his trusted aide to the Miao army's main camp and reported that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to attack the mercenaries. He also listed out his reason, which was that the mercenaries were too careless and this was the perfect time to take them down. The trusted aide quickly passed by the mercenaries' camp again. After observing for a while and confirming that the scout's report was correct, he went to the Miao army's main camp and met with King Miao Jinlong. He then told him of his general's plan. Attack the mercenaries' camp? Hearing the report, Miao Jinlong, who was originally sitting at the head of the table, was suddenly energized. However, when he repeated the sentence, he did not forget to look at Scholar Zhou, the most cultured person in the camp. Zhou was originally listening attentively. It must be said that he was indeed smart. When he heard the scout report that General Zhang Tsung had led the troops to Lijiao Prefecture without any success, he had already predicted that the journey back would not be peaceful. Now that he heard the trusted aide that Zhang Tsung sent back say this, he sighed in his heart. Zhou would not believe what the scout said about the mercenaries' camp being lax and the soldiers slacking off without any morale. Chapter 434. Since they were able to wipe out the Huang bandit army, which was a huge headache for the southern Ming Empire, how could such an army be as weak as described? If that was the case, it could only prove that the other party had ulterior motives. Or rather, they were just putting on an act and waiting for others to attack. Although Zhou had these thoughts in his mind, he did not intend to argue. The strength of the mercenary army was not something that he could rely on. Perhaps it was only when he was rebuffed and suffered losses that others would believe his words. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Therefore, when Miao Jinlong looked at him, he did not object firmly and only expressed his opinion. My king, the mercenary army should not be as weak as they appear to be. I'm afraid there's a trap. A trap? The news said that they only have 7,000 people. General Zhang Tsung's army has 10,000 people. Including us, we have 80,000 people. So what if there's a trap? Miao Jinlong saw that Zoda's attitude was still calm and tried to persuade him. Zoda only expressed his opinion and said what he thought. Since others did not believe him, there was nothing he could do. He did not say anything and looked as though he would not change his opinion. Therefore, when faced with Miao Jinlong's second question, he did not say anything. Since even Zoda did not say anything, Miao Jinlong felt that his idea of sneaking into the camp was a good one. After all, if they could take down the mercenary army in one battle, Gaozhou Prefecture would be broken through. He would have made a great contribution along the way and would be able to reach the Guangzhou Prefecture. From there, he would be able to control and occupy the entire Guangdong Prefecture. With an idea in mind and no one standing out to object, Miao Jinlong immediately waved his hand and said to the personal guard sent by Zhangzeng, "Tell your general to choose to attack the mercenaries tonight. This king will send troops to support you. At the same time, I will also send troops to keep an eye on Gaozhou Prefecture so that they won't be able to come out to help." Yang Chendong was still chatting with First Madam Hu Yin and Third Madam Snow Lady in the tent. To him, chatting with his wives was the best way to relax. Report. Tiger's Mane's voice came from outside the tent. "Come in." Yang Chendong straightened his body. He knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, Tiger's Mane wouldn't have come to disturb him at this time. Yang Chendong's guess was right. Tiger's Mane had indeed come to inform him of the changes in Miao Jun's troops. "Young master, the 10,000 Miao soldiers who were returning to their camp have suddenly slowed down their speed. I've asked someone to calculate it. Based on their current speed, it's very likely that they'll reach our camp after midnight. Slow down." Yang Chendong couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this sudden change that could also be said to be a logical change. That day, Yang Chendong saw the Miao army walk past his camp in an extremely arrogant manner. He thought that this army was too proud and arrogant, and it was very likely that there would be people who were not content and would be like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Thus, he ordered the scouts to keep a close eye on them. At the same time, the camp was prepared to take precautions. However, all of this was just a guess, a feeling, or an inference based on experience. It couldn't be considered as the truth. However, with this information from Tiger's Mane, it was completely different. As everyone knew, once an army that had left the camp was on the way back, the soldiers would be anxious to return home. Their speed would only be faster and not slower. Just like these 10,000 Miao soldiers, their desire to return to their camp should be very strong. Thus, their speed should be very fast. Not to mention that they should have reached their camp before dinner. Even if they were a little later, their speed should have been faster. How could they suddenly be pushed back and only arrive at his camp in the middle of the night? If that was really the case, wouldn't it be better for them to have a good night's rest and return to camp early the next morning? Just from this point alone, it was obvious that the other party's intentions were clear. "How's the Miao army's camp?" Yang Chendong asked out of caution. Reporting to young master, the scouts monitoring there reported that nothing unexpected happened. "Everything seems to be normal." Tiger's Mane replied truthfully. "Everything is normal? Oof, that's the most abnormal thing. Think about it. If the army is really returning to camp, wouldn't the camp need to make some preparations? Seeing that the enemy is near, it's very reasonable for them to send out troops to welcome them. However, they didn't do anything which exposed their intentions." Yang Chendong gave a very certain answer after analyzing the situation. Originally, Tiger's Mane didn't understand why normal was abnormal. However, after listening to Yang Chendong's analysis, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Young Master was indeed the young master. He had talked about this before in the strategy class, but why didn't he think of this immediately? Well, if that's the case, the Miao army will definitely come tonight if nothing unexpected happens. They won't come late at night, but a little earlier. Since that's the case, we'll just prepare our pockets and wait for them to come. There's no reason for us not to eat this fat meat that's already in our mouth. Yang Chendong had a confident smile on his face. Seeing this scene, Hu Yin and Madame Shui's eyes twinkled like stars. Which girl didn't love heroes? Not to mention people like Yang Chendong, who had such a family business at such a young age. Even though they were already his wives, this still couldn't stop them from releasing their love for him. In fact, during this period of time, Hu Yin and Lady Shui had felt something. Why would these elite soldiers listen to her husband's words so obediently? Although they had heard the story of Yang Chendong saving the mercenary leader, they absolutely didn't believe it in their hearts. However, it didn't seem right to say that these people were their husband's soldiers. How old was Yang Chendong? How could he have the time to manage and create all this? Yang Chendong had already noticed this doubt, but he didn't say anything. Firstly, it wasn't the time to say everything. Secondly, he didn't want the two girls to worry. It was better to let them guess as they were now, and it would be easier for him to feel at ease. The 10,000 Miao army, after General Zhang Tsung's order, began to slow down their return journey. Those who were able to come out to attack the city naturally had good combat strength. In terms of overall strength, they were the elites of the 80,000 Miao army. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Tsung passed down the order in advance. That was, they could slow down and wait for the right time to directly rush into the mercenary camp, which only had 7,000 people, and take over the camp. 10,000 against 7,000, they had a big advantage in terms of military strength. In addition, they didn't encounter any decent resistance along the way. Over time, the arrogance of these soldiers could be imagined. Therefore, even if they were facing the mercenaries, the ignorant were fearless, and they had no fear at all. On the contrary, they thought that it was just a simple attack, and by sneaking into the camp, they were afraid that the situation would be decided with a single attack. As Yang Chendong thought, Zhang Tsung didn't choose to attack the camp in the middle of the night. Although late at night was the time when a person was in deep sleep, it was also the time when one's defense was the weakest. However, Zhang Tsung knew that as long as the mercenary general was not an idiot, he would definitely send someone to secretly observe him. In this way, he would also calculate when he would arrive at the enemy's camp. Since that was the case, how could he not be prepared at all? However, there was no need to be afraid as long as he was prepared. Zhang Tsung originally wanted to play the element of surprise. He would wait for the sky to turn dark and suddenly attack the camp. Such a sudden decision would definitely catch these mercenaries off guard. Zhang Tsung's plan was very good. However, he didn't know that Yang Chendong had already made preparations. More importantly, he didn't need to put up a strict defense. With the mines placed 500 meters away from the camp, victory was already in his grasp. It was precisely because of these weapons of mass destruction that others did not know or understand that the mercenary camp looked so lazy from the outside. That was why those Miao scouts who were spying on this place believed that this was indeed an unguarded camp. Not to mention other things, with the eyes of these scouts, even if you were tied on the inside and relaxed on the outside, they would still be able to see the general situation. At least, when they charged, it shouldn't be a problem for them to kill their way out of the camp. Naturally, the Miao army had heard that the mercenaries had advanced firearms before, but they weren't too afraid. They had seen the firearms of the great Ming dynasty before. As long as they could get close and change to close combat, it would be difficult for any firearms to play their role. If they were able to get their hands on some firearms, then they would have profited greatly. The news from his scouts made Zhang Tsung overjoyed. At the same time, he was even more determined to sneak into the camp at night. For this, he had already made preparations. He called all the small leaders who could lead more than 500 people in front of him. Everyone, remember, when you charge in, you must be fast and fierce enough. Don't let the enemy have any time to prepare. I don't mind telling you that there was news that when these mercenaries destroyed the Huang bandits, they obtained a lot of gold and silver. When the time comes, whoever gets the most of these things will naturally get more in the end. Do you understand? Zhang Tsung was afraid that the soldiers below wouldn't use their full strength, so he said this in a misleading manner. However, he didn't know that the faster they charged in, the faster they would die, and the more they charged in, the more they would die. The small leaders below were relatively uninformed. They had almost never heard of Yang Chendong's mercenaries. They only knew that there were a lot of treasures waving at them, and that was enough. Although they had a hand over a certain percentage of the treasures they snatched, wouldn't it mean that the more they snatched, the more they would be able to keep? Although most of them hadn't read books, they still had some understanding of this. After a round of pre-battle mobilization, the entire Miao army of more than 10,000 people became excited. In their eyes, it was as if victory already belonged to them. The only difference was that they could snatch more and gain more. Chapter 435. Gaozhou Prefecture. Kuang Yi, Guan Ying, Ma Wei, and Yu Guang were standing below the tall city gate tower, looking into the distance. Is the news accurate? The Miao army really slowed down? Kuang Yi stood in the middle of the crowd and said solemnly. The Miao army was already at the city gates, but they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they circled around the city and made a trip to Laizhou Prefecture. This way, it seemed like Gaozhou Prefecture was temporarily safe, but Kuang Yi was very clear that the Miao army didn't find trouble with them because they were afraid of the mercenaries below the city gates. It should be because Yang Qindong's reputation as the god of war had spread, which made the other party wary. They didn't act rashly because they wanted to play it safe. As a result, Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. There were indeed smart people everywhere. Originally, he was still hoping that Miao Jun would take the initiative to provoke the mercenaries and then lead to a battle to the death. This way, he wouldn't have to spend so much effort to ask Yang Qindong to send troops. His hopes were dashed, and Kuang Yi could only wait for news from the imperial court. It could be said that at the beginning, Kuang Yi was shocked when he heard that Yang Qindong was also interested in being conferred the title of king. He even thought that this request was too high and impossible to fulfill. However, as the days passed, his thoughts changed. Shiping King Mu Bin could be conferred the title of king, so why couldn't Yang Qindong? Speaking of contributions, just based on the fact that Yang Qindong had saving Zhong's life on the battlefield, no one could compare to him. It was just a pity that the emperor's heavenly might was unpredictable. Perhaps he was used to being high and mighty, thinking that everyone should do anything for him. On the contrary, it made them slowly forget what gratitude was and what it meant to repay kindness. Regardless, after Kuang Yi calmed down, he thought that Yang Qindong could still be conferred the title of king, not for any other reason, but because the Southern Ming Empire had no other choice. Since this was the case, why not confer the title of king to someone with a different surname to solve the crisis in front of them? Not to mention that Yang Qindong's health seemed to be very poor. If that was the case, then it was not a big deal to crown a half-dead person as king. The obstacle should be much smaller. Just like that, she waited for the emperor's imperial edict before going to Yang Qindong to talk. Unexpectedly, a scout came to report that the 10,000 Miao soldiers who went to the Laizhou Prefecture had returned. Not only that, but they slowed down as they approached. Who was Kuang Yi? To be able to become the Minister of War, even if he did not participate in the war during peacetime and had never been on the battlefield, he should at least be someone who knew how to fight. Miao Jun's abnormal actions quickly attracted his attention. He immediately called for Guan Ying, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and the other generals. After a short discussion, they came to the conclusion that Miao Jun would most likely make a move tonight. Yes, master. We have already investigated, and it is indeed so. They must have their own motives for doing this, but we cannot confirm if they want to make a move against the mercenaries or us. Guaning stood up and reported the results of his investigation with Ma Wei and Yu Guang. There's no need to confirm. They must be making a move against the mercenaries. Kuang Yi was very confident. They were in the city, and attacking the city at night would be much more difficult than attacking in the day. Of course, he would also take some precautions. For example, if there were spies in the city, it was not impossible to open the city gates at night and lure the enemy into the city. How about this? The three generals will work hard tonight. Keep a close eye on the four cities and tell the soldiers below that without this old man's orders, even the three of you have no authority to open the city gates. Kuang Ye's voice was firm and powerful. Only by taking the authority into his own hands could he ensure that the city gates were not lost. As for whether his actions and suspicions would disappoint his subordinates, He couldn't care less at this critical time. Fortunately, it was only for one night. In addition, he was the Minister of War and the current Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince. His official rank was much higher than these people, so he still had some authority. As expected, when Kuang Yi said this, Guaning was slightly better, but Ma Wei and Yu Guang's expressions were somewhat unnatural. However, once they considered Kuang Ye's identity, even if the two of them were to have their authority taken away, they could only pinch their noses and nod in agreement. Master, since you can see that these Miao soldiers want to make a move against the mercenaries, shouldn't you send someone to remind the Duke of loyalty? Although they did not agree to send troops to deal with the bandits, they're still our allies. Guaning saw Kuang Ye's affirmation and thought about whether he should take the opportunity to express goodwill. Yes, I can send someone there to inform them. However, this old man thinks that the Duke of Loyalty has already seen through it. If he doesn't even have this little ability, how could the Huang bandits be destroyed so quickly? When Kuang Yi said this, his originally serious old face had a slight smile. However, he only wanted to send someone to inform Yang Qindong. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. After all, he did not have much military strength in his hands. Moreover, the situation was unclear. If they opened the city gates in the middle of the night, who knew what kind of accident would happen? The sun had already set and the sky was beginning to turn dark. At this time, the people on both sides seemed to be waiting for the sky to turn darker so that they could fulfill some people's desire to kill in the dark and windy night. Sure, it was equivalent to 8 o'clock in the evening. The Miao army that was originally moving slowly began to speed up. With the sudden increase in speed, they could reach the mercenaries' barracks in half an hour and sneak into the camp. In other words, the time they decided to attack was Haishur, which was between 9 o'clock in the evening and 11 o'clock in the evening. This period of time was not the best time to sneak into the camp. This was because most people were not asleep, or those who were asleep were not in a deep sleep. Once something happened, they would be able to react immediately. However, after Zhang Tsing knew about this, he still did the opposite. This was where he thought he was smart. First, he slowed down the marching speed to make people think that it was late at night when they arrived at the mercenaries' barracks. This way, they would make a wrong judgment. In order to ensure that they had enough energy at that time, if he was the leader, Zhang Tsung would arrange for the soldiers to sleep early and wake up before midnight. Considering that he would definitely do this, Zhang Tsung sent someone to observe the mealtime of the mercenaries' barracks. As expected, the rising of the fireworks was earlier than usual. This was the signal to eat and sleep early. With this, Zhang Tsung was full of confidence. The plan was for you to prepare to set up defenses in the middle of the night. I won't go against your wishes and attack early. This way, I can make use of the time difference. Thus, the sudden acceleration of the march at Haishur. Miao Jun, who had long been prepared and had even eaten in advance, began to move, running forward at an extremely fast speed. These people were abnormally excited, as if this time they were not going to war, but to obtain gold, silver, and treasures. With this kind of marching speed, the advantage was that even if they were discovered, they would not have enough time to prepare for defense. This was also the reason why General Zhang Tsung was so confident in giving the order to attack after knowing that the mercenaries' barracks did not specifically strengthen the defense. Under normal circumstances, such an unforeseen event would be discovered by the scouts first. Then, the scouts would quickly pass the news back. After that, the general who received the news would arrange for the army to prepare for defense. All of this required time. During this time, if the two sides were far away, there would be enough time to prepare. However, when the distance was extremely close like now, with less than an hour, it would be too rushed and even too late. In this way, the success rate of this kind of surprise attack was usually very high. With such a high probability occurrence, and it was against the mercenaries, not only would the chances of victory decrease, it could also cause the battle to go in the other direction. That would be the failure of the ambush. This was what everyone called trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Not to mention the mines that were already buried outside the barracks that could allow people to fly into the air just inside the barracks alone. Yang Shandong had already given the order to rest and sleep when he knew that the Miao army would pass by the barracks. Thus, other than a few companies that had to be on duty, most of the soldiers had already entered a state of sleep. Just like what Tiger's man had said, the enemy might not really come in the middle of the night. In order to launch a surprise attack, it was very possible that they would come one step earlier. With regard to Tiger's man's analysis, Yang Shandong completely agreed and even felt gratified. A strong army, or even a strong country in the future, could not solely rely on himself. It needed everyone's hard work. Only when more loyal soldiers improved their abilities could they do great things together. Yang Shandong agreed with this analysis. Naturally, the Lung Feng soldiers only rested for half a day. They had already woken up at 7 o'clock in the evening and began to eat the warm meals that they had reheated earlier. They replenished their energy and prepared for the big battle. The entire barracks was quiet, but in fact, a monstrous, murderous aura was forming. However, this kind of murderous aura could not be seen. It could only be felt when one was in the midst of it. It belonged to the kind of existence that could not be seen or touched. Not to mention the monstrous, murderous aura. After the 10,000 Miao army rushed for nearly an hour, they could already vaguely see the mercenary barracks outside with torches. It was previously said that whichever army charged in first would be able to obtain more wealth. With such a military order, the army that had just arrived did not even have the time to regroup. Instead, they rushed straight to the front of the barracks like a swarm of bees. Everyone was doing their best at this moment, as if they were afraid that the benefits would not belong to them if they were a step late. Chapter 436. Looking from afar, the frenzied charge looked like waves on the beach. Wave after wave, there was no way to stop them. In the process of charging, battle cries rang out. The torches that were originally unlit lit up one after another. From afar, it looked like the sky was filled with countless stars. What was supposed to come had finally arrived. In the mercenary camp, all the Cold Vanguard auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers began to gather at an amazing speed. They then took their equipment and weapons and began to gather at various locations according to the military orders they received. More than 7,000 people, almost 7,000 people participated in this battle. Other than the two Cold Vanguard companies and the first and second teams of guards by Yang Shandong's side, the Wolf Fong Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team had joined the battle. Obviously, Yang Shandong wanted to show the Miao army how powerful he was once and for all. He wanted them to be afraid of him from now on and not dare to do anything to him. Outside the camp, the battle cries were getting closer and closer. Not only in the south, even the Miao army headquarters in the northwest had sent 10,000 people to cooperate with the joint attack. With 20,000 against 7,000, the advantage was already very obvious. In addition, it was a sneak attack. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Naturally, the 20,000 Miao army soldiers could see such a simple logic. Therefore, they attacked the mercenary camp with extra force. There was a saying that one would not die if one did not seek death. At this moment, it was the most suitable saying for the Miao army. The charging Miao army soldiers did not know how powerful the opponents they were facing this time were and what kind of training they had to go through. They also did not know that 500 meters away from the camp, there were advanced landmines that could kill them. They had never even heard of this before. Once they stepped on it, it could quickly send them to the sky. Even if they did not shatter into pieces, it was enough to take their lives. Even the people around them could be blown to death by the fireball. It was precisely because of their ignorance and their eagerness to perform meritorious deeds that when the 20,000 Miao soldiers charged over from two different directions like a tidal wave, most of them did not even realize that they were already on the verge of death. All of this was completely reflected in the following battle. When the earth-shattering Miao army, or fake Miao army, the ordinary southern Ming people who had no food to eat along the way, arrived 500 meters away from the mercenary camp, while shouting excitedly, They were so excited that they thought that the fruits of victory were right in front of them. Then, the first flame lit up. The first landmine exploded. It was especially dazzling in the night. This flame was like a meteor from outer space. Suddenly, a dazzling light flashed. Then, at least 3 or 4 figures rose into the air. Then, more than a dozen figures were blasted to the ground. Yang Qindong provided them with some important books and some finished mines. The carefully selected craftsmen of the munitions factory had finally developed the first batch of mines. However, they did not get the essence of the mines. Although they used a lot of materials, the power was actually much weaker. At least, it was far from being comparable to the landmines in the future. However, all of this did not matter. Firstly, the lack of power could be made up with numbers. Secondly, the Miao army's charge this time was too concentrated. Everyone was basically following each other as they charged forward. Under such a formation, the lethality of the bombs was naturally very dazzling. It was not like the future where the emphasis was on long-range attacks. Even when it was necessary to send an army, it was often infiltrated by small groups of elites. Therefore, in the West where the battles were the most intense, it was considered very effective if a bomb could kill more than 3 people at the same time. It was far from comparable to now, where a bomb could kill more than a dozen people at the same time. Boom! After the first fireball appeared, the second fireball appeared, then the third, and the fourth fireball appeared. Countless balls of light burned, causing countless Miao army soldiers to either die or be heavily injured. When a number of balls of light increased, the number of cries and screams on the battlefield suddenly increased. There were 2 rows of almost 3 landmines. Yang Qindong considered that there were many Han civilians among them and did not want to kill too much. Otherwise, if he made them denser, there would be more fireballs and the lethality would be even greater. Clusters of flames lit up one after another. In the blink of an eye, the first row of landmines had all been passively detonated. Very quickly, the second row of landmines went off as well. Who knew how many people were lifted into the air in despair and died in horror and fear? Why did this happen? Since the first row of landmines had already been detonated and the 2 rows were 20 meters apart, why did the second row of landmines explode? Speaking of which, this was caused by the Miao army's desire for grandiose achievements. If the Miao army had not underestimated the mercenaries and relied on their numbers to attack in a dense formation, this would not have happened. It was because he knew that the mercenaries might have extremely advanced firearms that General Zhang Zeng decided to attack in such a way. In this way, if they were to encounter firearms from afar, they would not be able to kill many with such a dense formation. This allowed them to charge all the way until they entered the camp and engaged in close combat. The scales of victory would naturally tilt towards them. It cannot be denied that this might be a way to break through the firearms formation. It was just like when the Great Ming Dynasty was at its peak. When Zhu Di went out to the grasslands, the firearms team he led had encountered such an attack. For this reason, there were indeed many casualties and they had paid a great price. Even when Duke Ingzhang Fu had invaded Jiaoji, his firearms unit had also suffered a heavy blow from the Jiaoji army's counterattack. With the experience of his predecessors, the Miao army chose to use this method to break through the firearms formation. However, he did not expect to suffer such a huge loss. It could be said that this was due to the lack of information. If one had carefully studied the firearms of the mercenaries, they would know that the reason why they were called the new model was because their firearms could fire continuously. Compared to the Great Ming Dynasty's flintlocks, which needed to be loaded with gunpowder to fire a shot, this machine gun was much more advanced. Even if there were no landmines, with a few powerful machine guns placed here, the effect would still be surprisingly good. There was a saying in the later generations that whoever grasped the information would be one step closer to victory. This saying was also applicable in ancient wars. If one did not even know the details of the opponent and charged rashly, the result of failure was already destined. Without enough attention, an earth-shattering formation would only result in more casualties. When the first ball of fire lit up, the Miao army who was charging at the front wanted to stop. After all, The visual impact of that thing was too strong. However, they were at the very front. If they wanted to stop, they would have to ask for the permission of the brothers behind them. Therefore, before they could do anything, a huge force came from behind them, pushing the Miao Jun in front of them forward. Boom, boom, boom. As the explosions continued, the Miao army in the middle finally felt that something was wrong. However, how could they stop when they were charging at such a high speed? Just like that, they pushed their brothers at the front another 20 meters until the second row of mines was triggered. Only then did the army stop charging forward. However, it was also at this time that the Miao army at the back also rushed forward without hesitation, not knowing what was going on. Very good. The second wave of landmines has been triggered. Inform all the warriors that there is no need to follow the previous direction. There are no more landmines in front of us. Everyone charge. Luo, the commander of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment, who was appointed to be in charge of this battle, used a telescope with night vision to observe the situation on the battlefield. What followed was his excited shouts, followed by the loud sound of the bugle call. A squad of 10 warriors blasted the bugle call. The sound spread out and could be heard clearly on the battlefield. When the bugle call sounded, it meant that the entire army was charging. The moment they heard the bugle call, 7,000 Yang family soldiers rushed out like ferocious tigers with weapons in their hands. It was the same charge, but the Yang army's formation was much more orderly. The first echelon held bows that could shoot up to 100 meters away. Each person had 10 arrows. One could imagine the consequences of throwing the arrows into the air. Each person also had crossbow arrows that could penetrate anything at close range. When they reached a certain distance, it was time for them to show their power. The second echelon held shields and short swords. They could both defend and attack. The third echelon was also the main force of the charge. The steel swords and spears were like a sharp knife that pierced into the enemy's heart. The fourth echelon was mainly used for battlefield rescue. Some of them were carrying a stretcher in pairs, some were holding ropes to tie the captives, and some were holding loudspeakers that could be used for propaganda purposes. Under the protection of 100 fully armed elite cold front soldiers who were armed with the Type 95, they walked at the back and did the finishing work. The few echelons advanced in an orderly manner. No matter how fierce the battle was, their footsteps were firm. They were like a human tank, rapidly advancing forward. On Miao Junzhong's side, more than half of the front line was destroyed. Even the middle line was heavily damaged. It was at this moment that the rear line rushed over and collided with the retreating front line and middle line. Get out of the way, retreat. Get out of the way, you cowards. Why are you retreating? Get out of the way, let us charge forward, idiot. Don't you see the fire god showing his power? Why aren't you turning back? Chaos before the battle. This was Miao Junzhong's performance. The powerful landmines made these uneducated soldiers who did not understand science think that the fire god was showing his power. They were all scared out of their wits. How could they still have the will to fight? Chapter 437. Both sides were still pushing and shoving each other, not giving way to each other. Suddenly, arrows fell from the back and landed among the Miao soldiers who were confronting each other. At that moment, many of them were shot and fell to the ground. Where are our archers? Fight back. Seeing the arrows falling from the sky, Zhang Tsung, who was commanding the battle at the back, shouted loudly. Following his shout, some scattered archers also started to fight back. The arrows hit the shields of the Yang family army's second echelon. Other than the sound of impact, there was almost no damage done. After the weak counterattack of the Miao army, the first echelon of the Yang family army took out their crossbows and started to fight back. At a close distance, an arrow was shot, and it was accompanied by the fall of one of the opponents or the scream of another person. The third echelon also took this opportunity to quickly catch up. Then, the swords and spears were swung wildly. How could a frightened Miao army resist? Zhang Tsang was still sitting on his horse and wanted to give orders, but an arrow came out of nowhere and landed on his left shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain. General, the general is injured, quick! The general is injured, protect the general and retreat. The dozens of bodyguards saw that their leader who was being protected was also shot and shouted to go forward. Then, they pulled him down from the horse and supported him to retreat to the back. Even the bodyguards could see that the front was losing, and even losing. How could Zhang Sung not see it? Taking this opportunity, he pretended to be deaf and mute. He did not say anything and let everyone support him to retreat to the back. Those who kneel and surrender can live, otherwise die. The shout from the loudspeaker sounded like it was beside the ears of the chaotic Miao army. That shout stunned many people, and they stood still, not knowing what to do. Da-da-da, da-da-da. The fourth echelon of the Yang family army had also arrived. Lien Lung Feng, who was holding the 95 style, finally pulled the trigger. What followed was the scene of people falling to the ground one after another. This sudden gunshot was the last straw that suppressed the chaotic Miao army. The situation of the battlefield was also settled at this moment. The Miao family only had two choices: to retreat or to surrender. Run. Some of the faster Miao Jun soldiers who were at the back immediately turned and ran. Some of the Miao soldiers who wanted to run but were surrounded in the middle were not so lucky. When mercenaries began to appear around them, these people seemed to have only one choice left, which was to kneel down and surrender. The sound of gunfire continued, and the sound of cold weapons clashing could be heard from time to time. However, it was clear that the commotion was getting smaller and smaller. The battle had not even officially started, but it was already heading towards the end in the Miao army's main camp. Although King Miao Jinlong was still sitting at the head of the tent, his expression was obviously not as calm as before. The moment he heard the explosions, he had a bad feeling in his heart. It was just that he didn't want to admit it until he received the battle report from the front line. Reporting, the tent's curtains were pulled open from the outside, and the scout general who rushed and knelt on the ground with a thud. Reporting to your majesty, our army has been ambushed by the enemy and is retreating in defeat. Ambush? What kind of ambush? Aren't the mercenaries resting and sleeping? Miao Jinlong suddenly stood up from his chair, staring with a pair of red eyes as he spoke in a cold voice. We still need to find out the details, but the fact that the army is retreating is a fact. Please end it quickly, your majesty. The scout general did not know how to explain what he had seen. He only remembered that the moment the fire flashed, his eyes seemed to have gone blurry. Then, not long after, he saw the Miao army frantically retreating. If you can't find out, what's the use of having you? Hearing his subordinate's reply, Miao Jinlong was furious. Although he had already felt that something was wrong, when the answer came out, he realized that he could not take it anymore. Miao Jinlong was so angry that he lost his composure. Fortunately, Scholar Zoda's mind was not messed up. After all, this was the outcome that he had expected. However, his words carried little weight, and he could not stop it. In addition, he also wanted Zhang Tsung to suffer a great loss, so that he would not continue to be so arrogant in the future. Now that he saw that the front line had indeed lost, he stepped out from the ranks and said to Miao Jinlong, "Your Majesty, since the front line has lost, you should immediately send a general to receive them and reduce the losses. At the same time, close the camp gates and prepare for defense. This is the safest way." When Miao Jinlong heard Zoda's words, he was like a drowning man who had grabbed onto a piece of deadwood, nodding his head like a chick pecking at rice. Not bad, not bad. Go and prepare according to what Scholar Zo said. This was the strategy that they had discussed before. After all, planning for defeat before planning for victory was also the art of war. Of course, these suggestions were put forward by Zoda. It was also under his persuasion that the Miao army only sent out 20,000 men this time. Otherwise, they might have sent out even more people, and naturally, the losses would be even greater. With Miao Jinlong's orders, the Miao army camp quickly moved. Those who were supposed to save people went to save people, and those who were supposed to defend the camp tightened their defense. At least they did not lose their composure during the chaos. More importantly, Kuang Yi, who was originally looking for an opportunity to send out troops, could not find a suitable opportunity. Kuang Yi could see that the Miao army wanted to attack the camp. It was because of this that he thought of what he should do. For example, if the mercenaries lost, they would have to defend the city gates. On the other hand, if the mercenaries won, could he also take the initiative to attack? For example, he could directly attack the Miao army camp and capture or kill Miao Jinlong. Between the two options, he also made preparations for the second option. With his understanding of the mercenaries, of course, he thought that Yang Qindong had a higher chance of winning this battle. The reality was as such. After a series of explosions and sparks, the Miao army lost. As such, Kuang Yi urgently sent people out of the city to watch every movement of the Miao army camp. At the same time, other than leaving a portion of the troops to Guanying to defend the city, General Ma Wei and General Yu Guang were gathered by him to prepare 1,000 soldiers to attack the camp. Unfortunately, the number of troops was still too little. After receiving the news that the Miao army camp was not in chaos and that the defense was orderly, Kuang Yi could only give up on the idea of military action with a face of disappointment. Firstly, his troops were too little. Using 1,000 to attack the enemy's camp of 60,000 was no different from seeking death. Secondly, he did not inform Yang Qindong in advance. If he rashly attacked without any support, it was very likely that he would not be able to return. Kuang Yi stopped all military operations and only sent out scouts to investigate the situation outside. He still had a glimmer of hope, and that was whether the mercenaries would take the opportunity to attack the Miao army's main camp. If that was the case, he would definitely intervene. To Kuang Ye's disappointment, the mercenaries did not intend to attack the Miao army camp. They only rushed out for 2 miles before stopping. Following that, they turned back to clean up the spoils of war. Groups of captives were tied up with ropes and brought back to the mercenaries' camp. Piles of fire were set ablaze, directly igniting the corpses of the dead Miao army soldiers. This was not to destroy the corpses, but to prevent any plague from spreading after so many people died. Zhang Tsung still managed to escape, along with 8,000 Miao army soldiers. When they retreated back to the Miao army camp in shock, their legs seemed to be filled with lead, and they could not move a single step. Just like that, they sat on the ground with a plop. The soldiers could act like a bear, but as a general, Zhang Tsung could not. He scrambled into the main tent and knelt in front of Miao Jinlong, begging for punishment. Looking at Zhang Tsung, who still had an injury on his left shoulder, although Miao Jinlong was filled with hatred, he did not punish him too much. This was a general who started the war with him, a meritorious subject and the purest of the Miao people. Thus, after reprimanding him, he let him go to recuperate. Regarding Miao Jinlong's nostalgia, Zoda, who was watching from the side, admired and hated him at the same time. He admired a master who was loyal, and that was the goal he should follow closely. If he followed such a person, at least he would not have to worry about being heartlessly abandoned. What he hated was that he placed too much emphasis on relationships, and that it would be difficult for him to achieve great things. Zoda was still analyzing Miao Jinlong's character and his strengths and weaknesses when one of the kings of the Miao tribe spoke to him. "Mr. Zhou, this time our Miao army has suffered a great loss. In your opinion, what should we do next?" "King." Zoda quickly retracted his wandering thoughts and changed to a very serious expression. "After tonight's incident, we have already seen the strength of the mercenaries, and they are indeed very strong. It is better not to go head-to-head with such an opponent. Otherwise, it will hurt the king's foundation. It is better to focus on defense first, then report this matter, and let King Min handle everything." "Are we going to admit this loss just like that?" Miao Jinlong asked with a trace of unwillingness. "Of course we can't just admit it like that. However, if we do our best to fight the mercenaries and cause both sides to suffer losses, I am afraid that we will fall into the hands of some people. It is not a good thing to injure 1,000 of the enemy and 800 of our own. It is better to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo and look for opportunities to plan slowly." How could Zoda not see that this was Miao Jinlong's performance? He clearly saw the power of the mercenaries and did not want to be enemies with them, but he was worried that others would say that he was a coward. Since that was the case, he would help him find an excuse and find a way out. Zoda had lived in the Miao tribe for so many years, and he indeed understood the situation well enough. Just this sentence alone was enough to see through Miao Jinlong's thoughts. At the same time, he could not help but nod his head, and his originally cold expression eased a lot. Chapter 438. He was not the only king in the Miao tribe. Just this time, there were 3 powerful armies that followed the king of Min's army. They were Yang Wenba, the head of the Miao tribe in Dumang village, Wu Yingtu, and himself. Speaking of which, the strength of these 2 groups was not weak. If he were to be heavily injured and let them know, they would probably rejoice in his misfortune. He would definitely not do something that would hurt his loved ones and make his enemies happy. Okay, Scholar Zoe is right. Since that is the case, immediately give the order to lock down the camp gate. Soldiers are not allowed to enter or leave without orders. At the same time, report this matter to the king of Min and ask for support. Originally, Miao Jinlong just wanted to find a way out. Now that the excuse had appeared, Miao Jinlong used it as an excuse. After this order was given, the camp with less than 70,000 Miao soldiers quickly quietened down. Regardless of whether it was the mercenaries or the South Ming army, they were all waiting for Miao Jun's reaction. From their point of view, it was normal for Miao Jun, who had suffered a loss, to calm down. However, it was also normal for him to retaliate crazily in anger. But no matter what it was, they wouldn't back down. They would deal with it as it came. Of course, if they had a choice, it was better not to use their weapons. After all, from a certain point of view, Miao Jun was only the auxiliary force of the king of Min's army. Even if they were eliminated, it would not be of much use. Instead, it would attract the king of Min's army to surround and attack them. Of course, unless they had enough power to fight them head-on. That would be a completely different attitude and thinking. They closely observed Miao Jun's movements. When the sun rose, Miao Jun suddenly quietened down. This was both reasonable and unexpected. But no matter what, now that they were quiet, everyone was temporarily safe. Kuang Yi, who stood on the top floor of Gaozhou's capital city, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, he had a worry that he did not say out loud. That was, Miao Jun saw that the mercenaries were powerful and could not be provoked. Would he attack them in anger? If so, they had to be on guard. Teacher, the sun is up. Miao Jun will not attack the city again. You have also stayed here for a night. Go back and have a good rest. Looking at Kuang Yi, who was over 60 years old, Guaning, as a student, said with a heartache. There was a smile on Kuang Ye's lips. Although he had stayed up all night, he did not seem to be in low spirits. Instead, he turned to Guaning and said, "You see, this is the strength of the mercenaries. They had nearly 3 times the number of people, and they used a night attack, yet they still did not gain the slightest advantage. Tell me, why is the court not willing to put such a good general in an important position?" Teacher, His Majesty must have his own considerations. You should go and rest first. How could Guaning not know the meaning behind Kuang Ye's words? In fact, when he first heard that Yang Qindong also wanted the title of king with a different surname, he was also very angry. In his view, this was not a display of loyalty at all. But after thinking about it, Yang Qindong wasn't completely someone from the Southern Ming Empire. If it wasn't for the emperor's invitation, he wouldn't even care about the chaos in Guangdong. Now that the chaos in Guangdong had been resolved, if they wanted them to resolve the chaos in Yunnan, how could they not pay a price? If he was Yang Qindong, he would probably also make some requests, even some excessive ones. This was because looking at a problem from a different perspective would lead to different results. For example, if 2 people were looking at the same palm, you would look at the palm, and the other would look at the back of the hand. Their feelings would naturally be different. There was no such thing as absolute right or wrong. Although Guaning knew that Yang Qindong's request was somewhat excessive, even demanding an exorbitant price, but looking at the current situation, it seemed that other than him, it would be very difficult for others to turn the situation around in a short period of time. It seemed that there was already a king with a different surname. Yang Shandong's request for one also didn't seem to be too excessive. Let's not talk about how Guaning looked at Yang Shandong first. Let's talk about how, when he helped his teacher Kuang Yi down the tower to rest, the sixth young master was not idle at all in his own camp. The battle had already ended, and under the efficient operation of the Yang family army, the cleaning of the battlefield was also nearing completion. The battle statistics were also reported under the cooperation of the regiment political commissar, the battalion instructor, and the battalion instructor. Right now, it was placed on the table in front of him. Last night's battle was a battle with preparation, which was why they achieved such a glorious result. On the battlefield, they killed more than 5,000 enemies, captured nearly 7,000, and only about 8,000 escaped. To be able to achieve such a result with 7,000 soldiers on the battlefield, it was indeed very gratifying and could be considered a great victory. But when he saw the losses on the Yang family army's side, Yang Shandong still couldn't feel happy. Not for other reasons, but because it was written that 3 of the Cold Front Army soldiers were injured, 2 of the auxiliary soldiers were heavily injured, and 20 of the auxiliary soldiers were injured. 60 of the auxiliary soldiers were killed, 30 of them were heavily injured, and 300 of them were lightly injured. When the loss of nearly 100 people and more than 300 injured people was reported to Yang Shandong, his face sank unconsciously. This was a battle with preparation, especially when the mines were absolutely effective, but they still paid such a huge price. This made Yang Shandong realize that using cold weapons against cold weapons wasn't very reliable. In the past, the Yang family army could be said to have won every battle. Even when they faced the 100,000 Huang bandit army, they didn't suffer such great losses. All of this was because of the superiority of their weapons. This time, Yang Shandong intended to remove the new guns, wanting to see the effects of cold weapons, but the results were obviously not very satisfactory. Perhaps some people said that under the same cold weapons, they defeated 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties and captured 7,000. No matter how one looked at it, it was a victory. This saying couldn't be said to be wrong, but at least it didn't apply to the Yang family army. What kind of people were the Yang family army, and what kind of training did they undergo? Not to mention the elite Cold Front Army and the auxiliary soldiers. Even the auxiliary soldiers had undergone strict training. Quite a few of them had performed well in the forest battle exercise a while ago. But now, some of them had died on the battlefield, and there was nothing left. After such a great sacrifice, the soldiers had died before they even reached the real battlefield. How can anyone be happy? China's history had already proven that they preferred to be kind like water, which meant that they didn't rush things. They were used to slowly changing others and stabilizing their own power. This was also the main reason why most of the founding emperors weren't young. Logically speaking, with Yang Shandong's age and the current situation, if he performed well and was conferred the title of king, it wasn't impossible for him to spy on the entire Great Ming dynasty. On the contrary, he had a high chance of success, and it wasn't impossible for him to become the founding emperor of a generation. However, this method of boiling the frog in warm water wasn't what Yang Shandong wanted. He, who was familiar with history, knew very well what would happen in the future. He also knew that in a few years, the backbone of the Han people would be broken by a few 100,000 people. Then, they would rule for hundreds of years until the unforgettable 1840, when the backbone of the Qing dynasty was broken. That was more than 100 years of humiliation for the Han people. Even if great people appeared later on, it was extremely difficult to restore the prosperity of the past. The world structure had already been formed, and if they wanted to walk out, even a small step would be very difficult. Yang Shandong, who was once a soldier, understood this history too well. Chapter 439. Early in the morning, in the courtyard of the mercenary camp, 7,000 Yang family soldiers stood in their respective lines. In front of them were the corpses of 63 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Beside them, there were a few dozen heavily injured comrades carried on stretchers, as well as hundreds of others wrapped in bandages. These were the soldiers who had died in the battle last night. Now, all the dead soldiers had been carried out, and the corpses had been put on some simple makeup to make them look less tragic. The other injured comrades were scattered around. This scene stunned all the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers, except for the elite soldiers, Cold Vanguard. Their faces were filled with confusion. Lung Feng naturally knew what was going on. In the previous battle on Ryukyu Island, there were also examples of comrades sacrificing themselves. The auxiliary soldiers were a little better. Most of them had heard about the death ceremony when they joined the army in Crimson City. It was said that this ceremony would allow their souls to ascend to heaven and stop suffering. They even said that this ceremony was called a memorial service. They had only heard about it, but had never actually experienced it. The temporary auxiliary soldiers were completely stunned. They had never heard of it and had never seen it with their own eyes. At this moment, they stood there with a look of confusion. Perhaps in their minds, they had clearly won a great victory last night. So why did they make everyone look so solemn? What was going on? In the eyes of others, defeating 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties, killing 5,000, and capturing 7,000 was naturally a great victory. But in Lung Feng's eyes, this victory was nothing. Fortunately, most of them had used cold weapons yesterday. If they had used the 9-5 sword, this battle would not have been considered a victory. At most, it would have been a draw. The Yang family soldiers were all gathered here. At the same time, the 7,000 captives were all escorted here. According to Yang Qindong, this was a pre-battle education. If this method was used well, it would have an unexpected effect. Everyone was present. The commander of Lung Feng's 2nd Regiment, Luo Pe, ran in front of Yang Qindong, who was in his commander's uniform, and gave a very standard military salute. Comrade Commander, all the members of the memorial service have gathered. Please give your instructions. Please be at ease, Yang Qindong said solemnly. He put on the marshal's uniform that he had kept in the large warehouse to show his respect for this ceremony. Just like Luo Pe and the group of officers, they had also changed out of their combat camouflage uniforms and put on regular clothes to show their solemnity and might. In fact, after these officers changed into their normal uniforms, they did indeed look very impressive. Many of the soldiers who were charging towards the Imperial Army made up their minds to perform well in the future and get themselves an official uniform. How impressive would it be when they returned to their hometowns? As for Yang Qindong, when he strode to the center of the temporary stage, the entire camp fell silent. At that moment, there was only one person in the eyes of tens of thousands of people. There was only one sound in the ears of tens of thousands of people, and that was Yang Qindong and what he was about to say. Dear comrades did not use a script. Yang Qindong chose to give an impromptu speech. Fortunately, he had experienced many such occasions in his previous life, so he already had a rough idea of what to say. However, it was a different era. Today, he used a practical speech. The target scanned the entire place, not even letting go of the Miao army captives who were still tied up. Then he said in a solemn voice, Dear comrades, last night, the Miao army suddenly launched a fierce attack on our camp. In the face of the test of life and death, all of you made a heroic performance and handed in a perfect answer sheet. Relying on your courage, you defeated your opponents and won the victory. You are the best, and I am proud to have all of you. Salute. First of all, the victory of last night was affirmed. This made all the soldiers who participated in the battle puff out their chests. Everyone's face was filled with pride. But Yang Qindong's tone changed, and his voice became a lot deeper. Some of our dear comrades and brothers sacrificed their lives to protect their dignity in the battle last night. They sacrificed their lives in exchange for victory. It is because of their heroic sacrifice that we have achieved our glorious and great victory. Today, we are deeply mourning our beloved comrades. They are Zhang Hongdong from 1st Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Li Kai-hsien from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Rin Juzi from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Platoon, 2nd Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Yang Weisong from 3rd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st 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 Platoon, 1st Company of the 63 names were read out by Yang Chendong one by one. Every time he read out a name, a soldier's corpse behind him would be covered with a white sheet. When he finished reading out all the names, there were already soft sobbing sounds coming from the scene. Those who had tears in their eyes and could not help but cry were the friends and family of the dead soldiers. They were originally members of the Huang Bandit Army. They were citizens of the Southern Ming Dynasty. However, they lost their homes in the war and could not survive. They had no choice but to join the army to make a living. However, in the end, no one knew whether they were lucky or unlucky. They became captives of the mercenaries, and after a strict selection, they became temporary auxiliary soldiers. In last night's battle, after such a long period of psychological education and strict training, the temporary auxiliary soldiers showed a good performance. They displayed their valiant side completely and finally won the battle. However, in the end, because the enemy's numbers were too great and they didn't have much combat experience, 63 people died in the battle. It was war after all. People died. Everyone who participated in the battle was already prepared for this. Furthermore, they achieved such a great victory. Only 63 people died and less than 400 were injured. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Needless to say, when the results of the battle were tabulated, many temporary auxiliary soldiers were given military merits because of their excellent performance. Some were directly promoted from temporary auxiliary soldiers to auxiliary soldiers. Some were focused on training among the temporary auxiliary soldiers and became the vice squad leader. There were also some who made military merits and were rewarded with silvertails. This good side quickly washed away the sadness of losing their comrades. Not to mention, they also heard that the higher-ups would actively search for the families of the deceased comrades. Once they were found, they would definitely be given a very generous pension. This was already enough. At least, this kind of treatment was not available in other armies. But even so, the memorial service was still held. The young man who was said to be the highest official read out everyone's name. This honor was probably something that none of the temporary auxiliary soldiers would have thought of. Such a glorious scene, such a solemn memorial service. How could they not be moved and even shed tears? In fact, before they joined the temporary auxiliary soldiers, most of these people did not even have a decent name. Stone, Gosheng, Tai Dan were their titles. This was also because their families were too poor, and it was said that a cheap name was easy to support. It was only after they joined the temporary auxiliary soldiers that they were given new names with the help of their instructors. Now, these new names would go with them. Presumably, if the dead really had a spirit, these 63 comrades would be able to rest in peace after seeing this scene. There were even more people who thought that if they could have such a solemn memorial service on the day they died, they would be satisfied. Now that he had come to this world, he was able to be remembered by others in an upright manner. This was something that he had never dared to think about in the past. Future generations would also be proud of this scene today. This scene also shocked the 7,000 captives of the Miao Army. Although they had the name of the Miao Army, very few of them were actually Miao, perhaps only 1/10 of them. The other 6,000 some were Han that the Miao Army had recruited along the way. To these people, there was no sense of belonging or loyalty at all. Originally, when they joined, it was just to fill their stomachs and survive. If not for the fact that they were all in their 20s and were stronger than the other young men, even if they wanted to join the Miao Army temporarily, they would not be given the opportunity to do so. It was said that the most important symbol of the Ming dynasty's prosperity was the increase in population. After experiencing the resurgence of Taizu Zhu Yuanzhong, Qingzu Zhu Di, and Ren Xuanji, the population of the Ming dynasty had reached a peak. The southwest had also not experienced the flames of war for a long time, so there were still many men in the prime of their lives. This was why Yang Qindong had taken a fancy to them and had intentionally walked out of the capital of Beiming. The great man had once said that many hands made light work. For Yang Qindong, who wanted to send the Han to the apex of the world, high-quality manpower was something that he urgently needed and could not let go of. Putting aside the physical condition of these people, the scene in front of them had completely shocked them. Although most of these people had never been on a battlefield, and even if they had only recently come into contact with war. But had they not seen pigs run before? Had they not eaten pork before? When had they ever heard of anyone giving such preferential treatment to dead soldiers? What kind of army was this? At this moment, a huge question mark had appeared in everyone's mind. In fact, it was not just the 6,000 some Han who were shocked. Even the 700 or so Miao soldiers were stunned. Because of geographical reasons, the Miao people had been entangled with the Han for many years. There were also many cases of intermarriage in private. It was truly a case of, I am in you, I am in you. It seemed that there was no way to verify who was the pure-blooded Miao. It was precisely because they were too close to the Han that they could not distinguish between each other. This time, if Zhu Qizhan of Ying sect had not been hot-headed and wanted to levy heavy taxes in the southwest to support his new army to fight the northern Ming, they would not have suddenly launched an attack under the king of Min's persuasion if they were not forced to the point where they could not survive. In the end, they did not have any ill feelings towards the great Ming. It was just that their living conditions were too bad and they had no choice but to rebel. Chapter 440. However, regardless of whether they were 100% Miao people or not, they rarely came into contact with war. It was only because they were Miao people that they were valued and trusted more by Miao Jianlong. Hence, they were in a better position during the war. However, when it came to knowledge, they were no different from the other people of the great Ming dynasty. Just like the scene in front of them, they were also shocked. Although their hands were tied, it did not prevent them from widening their eyes to look at everything in front of them. They wanted to see what these mercenaries were up to. Under the gaze of more than 10,000 people, Yang Qindong finished reading the eulogy. Then, he took off his military cap and shouted to the audience, "Fire the gun and mourn for our dead comrades for 3 minutes." After that, Yang Qindong was the first to take the initiative to lower his head, followed by Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others beside him. Then, it was Commander Luo Pa, Political Commissar Kong Jie, and a group of Lung Feng, auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. More than 7,000 people lowered their heads at the same time to mourn for their dead comrades. The scene was so grand and solemn that it shocked the 7,000 captives. At this moment, their hearts seemed to have been pierced deeply by something, making it difficult for them to breathe. Bang, bang, bang. Captain Xiu Vi of the 1st Guard Unit and Captain Dao Xiao of the 2nd Guard Unit led a group of team members and began to fire the gun, sending their comrades on their way to heaven. Under the sound of gunfire, especially the continuous firing of bullets, the 7,000 captives received a re-education process in their hearts. Come, cremate the 63 martyrs and send their bones back to the Monument of Heroes in the city. In the future, they will forever be worshipped by future generations. Their names will also be engraved on the heroes' list for their descendants to pay homage to and for the world to remember. Under Yang Qindong's roar, piles of torches were lit and the 63 corpses were burning. No one knew if it was an illusion, but at this moment, many people seemed to see a breeze blowing over these burning corpses. It was as if their souls were really liberated, either going to heaven or reincarnating to a better world. The memorial service was over, but the significance of this symbol was far from over. This was equivalent to a big lesson, and every step was deeply knocked on everyone's heart. At this moment, it seemed that the onlookers were no longer afraid of death. In their minds, after death, their souls had a place to stay. What was there to be afraid of? Soldiers dying on the battlefield. Wasn't this a kind of fate? On the contrary, what if they did not die and could survive? Didn't that mean that there would be more good days in the future? Even if they were dead, their families would have someone to rely on. Furthermore, their chances of survival were still very high. At this moment, all the soldiers to the army's morale, at this moment, the entire army's army. The memorial service was also a shock to the 7,000 captives. They had never seen or even heard of such a ceremony before, and it deeply stimulated them. Chio with chio with chio to percent V, chio with chio. After all, they were about to expand into the southwest region. If they had the help of these locals, especially the Miao people, they would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Yang Shindong already had such a plan, and Kong Jie had volunteered. There was no reason for him to refuse. With a wave of his hand, he indicated that as long as they had a clean background and weren't evil people, he would consider taking them in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. At the same time, he promised them that if they performed well, they would be given the same opportunity to compete with other temporary auxiliary soldiers. Kong Jie, who had been thinking about the situation, left to carry out the order. Then, with the instructors and company instructors as the backbone and some soldiers who were good at talking, they formed small groups and went deep into the captives. They began to investigate the past of these captives and filter out potential recruits. Under such a strong psychological attack, the Han people who originally did not have much of a sense of belonging quickly accepted the change. Once the first step was taken, the rest of the matters would be easy to handle. Not long after, the captive soldiers began to change their allegiance. Even some of the Miao people were convinced by them. Perhaps they knew from the start that no matter who became the emperor and conquered the country, it would not have much to do with them. Since that was the case, they might as well follow the mercenaries in front of them. They had heard from the auxiliary soldiers of Lung Feng that their families were living a rich and beautiful life. Some of the things that came out of their mouths were things that the captives had never even heard of before. However, when they saw these people describing everything with a straight face, and everyone saying more or less the same thing, they believed them. Not to mention that what was said was true. Even if it was a lie, it was not uncommon for it to become true after a lot of people said it. Of course, not everyone could be taken in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. After investigating and encouraging people to report and expose them, they still found some people with bad natures. Among them were Miao people and Han people. Not long ago, when they attacked the cities of the Southern Ming dynasty, they did many bad things like burning, killing, and looting. Once these people were found, Kong Jie would sentence them according to their evil deeds. In Qiqian City, the relevant laws were gradually being perfected. There were also some rules that stated what kind of crime a person committed and what kind of punishment they would receive. According to this request, the punishment was placed on these villains. Immediately, more than 100 people were sentenced to death, and more than 600 people were sentenced to reform through labor for different terms. Those who were sentenced to death were directly executed in the military camp. Over 100 swords fell, and over 100 heads fell to the ground. Over 100 people died. As for those who were reformed through labor, they were all escorted to Laizhou Prefecture behind them. At the border of the coast, the Yangshi Navy had already sent ships to wait there. They brought over many new weapons and ammunition from the munitions factory. Other than these 600-plus criminals who had done something wrong, there were also over 1,000 Han and Miao people who did not want to join the temporary auxiliary army because they did not meet the requirements or did not understand the situation. These people would all be sent to the small glass island. When they arrived there, those who should serve their sentences would serve their sentences and atone for their sins through labor. The others would also be sent to other units and factories that needed them. In the end, out of the 7,000 captives, only 5,000 were allowed to join the temporary auxiliary soldiers. Even so, this result was enough to make Yang Chendong very satisfied. After a battle, They had learned a lesson and experience. The strength of the military had also been strengthened. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. At the same time, the 5,000 people who were accepted were also very happy. Not to mention what they had learned in the past few days that made them have a good impression of the mercenaries. Just the basic necessities of life had greatly improved. They just casually took one out. The shoes they usually wore were straw sandals. In the Ming Dynasty, only officials and rich people could wear leather boots or long boots. In the 25th year of Hongwu, the imperial court further decreed that commoners, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and odd-job workers were strictly prohibited from wearing boots. They could only wear leather boots. Only in the cold northern regions were they allowed to wear leather boots. Those who disobeyed would be punished with death. As for the ordinary commoners, they mainly wore straw sandals and leather boots. They were just ordinary shoes and leggings. Walking with such shoes naturally wouldn't be a problem. However, if one wanted to travel for a long time, it would easily cause problems. Many times when one went on a long journey, one would have to bring several pairs of shoes. There is no guarantee that they wouldn't break or that there wouldn't be a time when one was barefoot. Let's look at what kind of shoes the mercenaries wore. Forget about cloth shoes, the lowest were rubber shoes. The garment factory copied the rubber shoes provided by Yang Chendong. Due to the seriousness of the people at that time, coupled with the fact that there wasn't a trace of laziness in the workmanship, such shoes were much sturdier. The more powerful ones, like the elite soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, wore high-waisted leather boots. They would even dare to charge through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames. Once a temporary auxiliary soldier joined, they would immediately be given 2 pairs of rubber shoes the size of their feet and a set of extremely resistant green training uniform without any military rank. Just based on this, who knew how many people were attracted to this place? This was all caused by poverty. If the commoners were wealthy and accustomed to a stable life, then even if someone wanted to rebel, they wouldn't be able to do much. Speaking of which, in terms of lessons and experience, after a cold weapon battle, Yang Chendong saw his own shortcomings. When the weapons used by everyone weren't too different, no matter how well prepared you were, there would still be casualties on the battlefield. Thus, how to prevent such a thing from happening became a problem that Yang Chendong had to seriously consider. After calling over Commander Luo Pa of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment and Commander Lu Zhua of the Auxiliary Regiment, they finally decided after a round of discussion. In the future, whenever there was a war, the Cold Vanguard Regiment wouldn't need to use any cold weapons to fight. They would directly use the Type 95 to overwhelm the enemy, except for special circumstances. As for the auxiliary soldiers, they would be allocated a Type 81 assault rifle in normal times, while the other 2 would use strong crossbows. During wartime, each person would have a crossbow. In short, they would be able to protect themselves and kill the enemy. As for the temporary auxiliary soldiers, their loyalty had yet to be tested, and their strength had yet to be proven. Thus, they could only be given some steel knives and spears. Of course, the quality of these steel knives was different from the ones used by the Ming Dynasty soldiers. They were also harder. In fact, when they were fighting, they might even be able to chop the opponent's large knife in half and gain the advantage. Since it was a battlefield, there would always be casualties. A temporary auxiliary soldier was like a big fish that had to jump through the gate. Only when you fully displayed your advantages and truly gained everyone's recognition would you be able to become an official auxiliary soldier and enjoy the qualifications to use advanced firearms. Chapter 441. What was comforting was that when Luo Po announced these rules and regulations on behalf of the military, no one stood out to oppose it. It seemed that this was unfair to some people. However, if one wanted to succeed and gain something, how could he reap without putting in the effort? For those who were not capable, even if you gave them the 95 style, they might not be able to survive on the cruel battlefield. Strict hierarchy was necessary in many cases, especially in the military. There was no clear hierarchy. On the battlefield, one had to listen to someone else. Once an army had two or more voices, no matter how powerful it was, it would not be far from destruction. Yang Shandong was still digesting the captives who had just joined the temporary auxiliary army. Fortunately, such things had happened before. Whether it was the grievance meeting, all kinds of ideological education, strict training, better food, better treatment, cohesiveness, sense of loyalty, etc., all of these have played a big role. Yang Shandong believed that in at most half a month, these 5,000 new soldiers would be integrated into this big family. In addition to the originally disorganized organization, there should be no problem with the soldiers and fighting strength under the guidance of the old and the new. The mercenaries were actively making preparations here. The other forces were not idle either. Miao Jinlong suffered a great loss in the hands of the mercenaries. Scholar Zhou's words were more important to him. The king of Miao, who was almost as obedient as the king of Miao, first adopted a defensive posture and firmly controlled his nearly 60,000 troops in the military camp. At the same time, he sent people to ask the king of Min for provisions, reinforcements, and countermeasures. The king of Min's base camp temporarily chose Pingyue Mansion as the corner. To the east of Pingyue Mansion was Shaozhou Mansion. After that, they would be at the forefront, which was also Ganzhou Mansion, where the king of Yangzhou, Zhu Huilu, was at the vanguard. The biggest advantage of living in Pingyue Mansion was that they could attack and retreat without worrying about personal safety. From this point alone, it could be seen that the king of Min, Zhu Huilu, was still very afraid of death. In history, Zhu Huiliang was described as a very unbearable person. After the death of his father, Zhu Huiliang, his two younger brothers, Zhu Huiliang, the prince of Guangdong, and Zhu Huiliang, the prince of Yangzhou, were not on good terms with him, causing serious internal friction. In the end, they were suspected by the imperial court and did not have a good ending. However, history was history after all. It was also written by people and limited by various objective factors. Sometimes, it even depended on the personal interests of the historian. Just like Yongzheng of the Qing dynasty in the future, there were all kinds of opinions about whether or not he was the legitimate successor to the throne. However, this did not prevent him from becoming the bridge between the Kangxi and Qianlong dynasties. Zhu Huihua was the one who was underestimated by history. Otherwise, how could he inherit the title of King of Min? Perhaps some people would say that it was a matter of course for the eldest son to inherit the throne, but how many eldest sons did not live to the day when they should stand up? Not only did Zhu Huihua survive to this point, but he was also able to gather such an army that could resist the Southern Ming Empire and force them to retreat step by step. This was already a kind of ability. Different from Miao Jinlong, Zhu Huihua naturally had a lot of talented people around him. Not to mention that his two younger brothers were helping him. He also had a lot of civil and military officials under him. Just speaking of this period of time, he had also recruited a lot of elites and talents. For example, Yin Tao, one of the original chief arresters of the Ministry of Justice who escaped from Baiming's capital, was now working under him. Yin Tao had listened to Wu Yong's words. In addition, his immediate superior Yu Shiyue and Yang Shandong were not on good terms. Thus, he thought that riches and honor could only be found in danger, so he walked on a tightrope. However, Yang Shandong's strength was too strong. In the end, he had to admit defeat and leave his hometown. After a while, he heard about the rise of King of Min and came over to seek refuge. Zhu Huihua, who was in urgent need of people, arranged for him to be by his side. He was one of the guards. Sometimes, when it came to people and things related to Baiming, he would also ask for his opinion. In addition to Yin Tao, there are also people sent by Baiming. Zhou Quan, the adopted son of L.V. Gue, the commander of Baiming's genie guards, was also working for King of Min. Different from Yin Tao, he could not be seen in the light. He could only come forward to give advice in secret or on some important matters. When a person's ability was too strong, he would make some friends and inevitably offend some enemies. For example, some people in Baiming had been looking forward to his death. In their view, only when Yang Shandong died could they have a day of success. Only then could Dai Zong truly and completely control the imperial power. Some people could then share the various benefits brought by power with Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu. Zhou Quan was sent by LV Gue. Of course, Zhu Qiyu also knew about his arrival. Moreover, he was a supporter who turned a blind eye to it. To put it bluntly, he also hoped that Yang Qindong could die. It would be best if he could die in the territory of the Southern Ming dynasty. In that case, he could make a big fuss. It was precisely because of the arrival of Zhou Quan and Yin Tao that King of Min, Zhu Huihua, had a more intuitive understanding of Yang Qindong. After receiving Miao Jinlong's battle report, he did not immediately send reinforcements. Instead, he asked these two to help him analyze the current situation. In a side hall of the temporary king of Min's mansion, Zhu Huihua looked at Zhou Quan and Yin Tao with great interest and asked, "You two have always said that this Duke of Loyalty is a tiger. Now we're going to face him. Do you have any better suggestions? By the way, not only do we value him, but also the Dai Zong Emperor values him. Even the prodigal Zhu Qijin values him. I have already received the news that Nanjing seems to have agreed to give Yang Qindong the title of king." Before listening to their opinions, Zhu Huihua first told them all the news he had received. From this point of view, it was not a day or two that he had the intention to rebel. It seemed that he had arranged a lot of people in the imperial court of the Southern Ming dynasty. Hearing this, Zhou Quan and Yin Tao first looked at each other. They were a little frightened by Zhu Huihua's power. In particular, Zhou Quan also wondered if King of Min had also arranged some people in Beiming. Of course, he would not ask such a thought, let alone say it out loud. The two sides were now in the stage of cooperation. On the surface, they needed to be sincere and united. Since Zhu Huihua asked, as a subordinate and a helper, the two had to speak. But before speaking, Zhou Quan, who was from the Brocade Guard, asked a question first. "Your Highness King of Min, isn't there news that Yang Qindong was assassinated and poisoned and will not live for long?" It was not strange for Zhou Quan to ask such a question. Although the powerful Great Ming dynasty was divided into the north and south, because of the short time, many yamens still had connections with each other. Especially important departments like the Brocade Guard, it was impossible to be divided so clearly in such a short time. It was not strange for Zhou Quan to know about the news that Yang Qindong was assassinated and poisoned in the Southern Ming Brocade Guard. "That's right." Zhu Huihua nodded. "I also heard such a thing. But isn't he still alive? As long as he is not dead, he is worth paying attention to. Moreover, sometimes the dead can make a comeback." Zhu Huihua's words were not completely groundless. It was only because of his cautious personality. This was also because he had heard many stories. One of them had been told by Yang Qindong himself. Back in the immortal abode of Beiming's capital, he had appeared as the ancestor of storytellers to talk about the three kingdoms. It was said that in order to harm Bamei, a powerful official of the Wei kingdom at the time, the deceased Zhuge Liang, had purposely made a blank book soaked in poison, saying it was a heavenly book. In the end, he had tricked Bamei and poisoned him to death. This was the famous example of a dead man killing a living man. Of course, all of this was just an unofficial legend. It could not be taken seriously. This was also something that Yang Qindong had said back then in order to raise the immortal abode's reputation. Unexpectedly, Zhu Huihua had heard it and taken it seriously. With this explanation, Zhou Quan nodded. He did not want to dwell on this matter any further. It was just as people said. As long as a person was not dead, it could not be taken seriously. Besides, with Yang Qindong's craftiness, it was hard to say what the inside story was. Since they couldn't talk about whether or not Yang Qindong was going to die, they could only treat him as an opponent. Thinking up to this point, Zhou Quan cupped his fists and said respectfully, "Your Highness Prince of Min, as far as we know, Yang Qindong is an extremely formidable person. Back then, he had defeated the Walla's army with only a few hundred men. We must be careful when facing such an opponent." As soon as Zhou Quan finished speaking, Yin Tao also expressed his agreement and added, "Brother Zhou is right. This Duke of Loyalty is not easy to deal with, especially when it comes to leading troops. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to annihilate young Master Huang's forces in less than 2 months. We need to be more cautious when dealing with him. Both of them were extremely cautious. Zhu Huiwan nodded in agreement. Then what do the two of you think we should do next? Are we not going to fight back? It would be best if we don't fight back. Yin Tao nodded. Zhou Quan couldn't help but frown when he heard Yin Tao's suggestion. His mission was to do everything possible to kill Yang Qindong, Bai Ming's greatest threat. Now that this person had taken the initiative to become Prince of Min's enemy, it was the best time to eliminate him. How could he tolerate doing nothing? Yin Tao had already seen Zhou Quan's expression from the corner of his eyes. Of course, he knew what Zhou Quan was thinking. Therefore, he chuckled and said to Zhu Huihua, "Your Highness Prince of Min, the strength of the mercenary army was clearly stated in Miao Jinlong's secret letter. 20,000 Miao soldiers were a surprise attack, but they were defeated by 7,000 people. Even if we were to face such an opponent, it would be very difficult to deal with them. If we have too few soldiers, it would be difficult to deal with them in one go. However, if we have too many soldiers, it would give the Southern Ming Empire a chance to breathe. This would be very disadvantageous to the overall situation." Chapter 442. Nodding his head, Zhu Huijin asked seriously, "Then according to General Yin, what should we do?" Yin Tao was one of Zhu Huijin's guards, and he was given the position of General of the Guards. It was reasonable to call him General Yin. It was also because he was trusted by King Min that Yin Tao decided to assist him sincerely. Hearing his master's question, he confidently raised 2 fingers and said, "It's simple. Against such a strong opponent, we have to work together openly and covertly to suppress him." Work together openly and covertly? Interesting, let's hear it. Zhu Huijin asked with interest. He knew that Yin Tao was once Yang Qindong's opponent. What kind of person understood you the best? It was usually your opponent. Zhou Quan originally wanted to interrupt. At least he would not allow Yin Tao to do as he said, and not do anything to Yang Qindong. If that was the case, how could he complete his mission? However, now that he heard about the 2 methods, one in the open and one in the dark, his curiosity was piqued. He suppressed the words he wanted to say and looked at Yin Tao. "It's simple. On the bright side, we can send people to the vicinity of Gaozhou Prefecture and use the army to surround it. We can use this to tell the Duke of Loyalty that we are not to be trifled with. If he really wants to work for the Southern Ming Empire, then it is very likely that he will fight to the death. In the end, no one will end up well. Presumably, as long as he is a smart person, he will not act rashly. This will also create an opportunity for us to work on the dark side." "What's the dark side?" Zhu Huijin asked impatiently. He had a feeling that Yin Tao did not come up with this idea on the spur of the moment. He was afraid that he had already prepared for this. As expected, Yin Tao's next words confirmed Zhu Huijin's thoughts. "On the dark side, we can assassinate Yang Qindong. I have already chosen the person. He is called Mo Ta. His martial arts are strong, and he is a native of Jiaoji. He also served in the Jiaoji army. Later on, when he was severely punished for doing something wrong, I saved him and arranged for him to stay in Gaozhou Prefecture." When speaking of this, Yin Tao's face was calm and composed, as if he was talking about something insignificant. "What? You have arranged the people. Is this the assassination of Yang Chun going to the east? But will we find out?" This time, Zhou Quan could not hold back and asked a series of questions. In response to Zhou Quan's question, Yin Tao smiled and said, "Don't worry, Brother Zhou. Mo Ta went to Gaozhou Prefecture more than a month ago as a refugee and has become friends with many people there. He shouldn't be suspected." "Oh, did you foresee today's situation more than a month ago?" This time, it was Zhu Huichun's turn to have a look of disbelief. "That's not it." Facing Zhu Huihua, Yin Tao certainly didn't dare to be arrogant. He told the truth. "Originally, I arranged this person to get information there, but I didn't expect Yang Qindong to go there. This subordinate had this idea temporarily." "Haha, that's a sudden idea good. For some things, the more unintentional it is, the more likely it is to succeed. If it is not deliberate, there will always be traces left behind. All right, then let this Mo Ta assassinate Yang Chendong. If he succeeds, then that would be for the best. If he fails, then we won't have to bear the blame. Zhu Huichun laughed a few times and said a few good words. Obviously, he had already approved of this plan in his heart. Your Highness is wise. That is how it should be. It would be best if Mo Tuo could kill Yang Chendong. Of course, in this subordinate's opinion, it would be very difficult to do so. This Duke of Loyalty has many experts protecting him. Fortunately, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. As long as Mo Ta dies, all the blame can be pushed to the Jiaoji people. At that time, Your Highness only needs to send someone to explain to Yang Chendong, and you can also promise to let him seek revenge from the Jiaoji people. In this way, when two tigers fight, one will definitely be injured, and we can reap the benefits. That's right. At that time, no matter who wins or loses, they will be greatly injured. It will be much easier to deal with them. Zhu Huiyu couldn't help but nod. Seeing Yin Tao so confident, he felt gratified in his heart. But at the same time, he asked with some concern if the assassin didn't succeed and was caught instead. Wouldn't it be bad if he gave you up? For Zhu Huijin to ask such a question, it was enough to show that he had seriously considered this matter and even agreed. Yin Tao was overjoyed. He cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, please rest assured. This subordinate has already made arrangements. Once Mo Ta attacks, regardless of whether he lives or dies, he will not be able to survive. Since Yin Tao said this, he clearly had complete confidence. Zhu Huijin relaxed. Good. Since that is the case, this prince will immediately arrange for Xuanzhou's general, Lu Dedeo, to lead 30,000 soldiers to the Guanghai Guard. First, we will take control of that place. This way, we will form an encirclement. It will not be easy for this loyal duke to escape. After the assassination, I will send Chun Tian to negotiate. I think this matter will be successful. Chun Tian was known for his eloquence. He was also one of Zhu Huijin's capable officials. As far as Zhu Huijin was concerned, he was very satisfied with Yin Tao's plan. The key point was that not only could he use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chendong, even if the matter did not succeed, he could ignite the flames of war between Jiaoji and Yang Chendong. Jiaoji agreed to send troops and did send troops. This caused the king of Min's faction's reputation to soar. They seemed to be a great help. However, in reality, Jiaoji had made all sorts of demands in this period of time. Although they were not excessive, Zhu Huijin felt that if he did not stop them, it would not be long before the other party's appetite was not something he could satisfy. At that time, a civil war would inevitably erupt. Since this was the case, releasing Yang Chendong early and letting them fight a war of attrition would only be beneficial to him. As for who would win, and whether the king of Min's faction would suffer a great loss after losing Jiaoji, Zhu Huijin was not very worried. From Yunnan to Guangxi and then to Guangdong, he had seen through the southern Ming strength. Furthermore, he had taken the opportunity to expand his army by hundreds of thousands. At this moment, he was not as afraid as before. Even without the help of the Jiaoji army, he was confident that he could take on the southern Ming army. If things went well, even if he defeated them, it would not be a problem for him to replace them. Since this was the case, this plan was definitely feasible. Zhou Quan, who was standing at the side, did not say anything, because regardless of whether it was the assassination or the battle between Jiaoji and Yang Chendong, this was equivalent to helping him complete his mission. Since this was the case, what else was there to worry about? Yin Tao's plan was approved just like that. Next, he would send someone to inform Mo Ta in Gaozhou Prefecture and let him find an opportunity to cause trouble. Gaozhou Prefecture. 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad, were sent to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. The bad news was that the king of Min's faction had sent his general, Lu Dedeo, to the Guanghai Guards with 30,000 soldiers. As a result, Gaozhou Prefecture was under attack from 3 sides. Although it was not completely sealed off, and there were still some roads leading from Nanjing to Gaozhou Prefecture that had not been taken over. If the imperial court wanted to send reinforcements here, it would be a huge blow. Now that it was surrounded, Kuang Yi knew that it would be difficult to protect Gaozhou Prefecture. Not to mention other things. Just a matter of food was enough for the 30 to 40,000 people in Gaozhou Prefecture to worry about. Fortunately, the good news was also sent. Zhu Qizhen finally replied to Kuang Yi's secret report. When the decree was sent to Kuang Yi, he immediately opened it. When he saw the contents, he was half happy and half worried. He was happy that Emperor Ingzong did not immediately reject Yang Qindong's request for the title of King of Men. He was worried that such a big matter had to be discussed with Baiming's substitute Zhu Qiyu, and that he had to settle the King of Men's rebellion first. Kuang Yi, the minister of the Ministry of War, was very clear about the scale of the rebellion of King of Men as he was involved in it. Not to mention other things, just in terms of scale, with the addition of the Miao army from Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong, it already involved 5 million people. In the middle of the Ming dynasty, the population was around 50 million. It had not reached the 60 million at the peak of the late Ming dynasty, but compared to the entire world, it was already a lot. Just the number of people in the rebel army was close to 1 million. If the Miao army and the Jiaoji army were added in, it would be even more. How many troops did Yang Qindong have? There were no more than 10,000 of them. And this was because he had defeated Miao Jinlong and used the prisoners as his soldiers. Speaking of Yang Qindong's expansion of the army, it was actually against the rules. Before, he could use the captives on the battlefield to expand his army because he had the identity of an imperial envoy. He had the power to make arbitrary decisions and take advantage of the situation. There was nothing wrong with doing so. However, right now, his identity as an imperial envoy had been taken away, and his identity had once again become a duke. If he still wanted to expand the army under these circumstances, it was tantamount to a provocation to the imperial power. Just based on this point, Kuang Yi and the others could use this to condemn him. However, the current situation was like this. Kuang Yi and the others could not even protect themselves, so what could they use to criticize Yang Qindong? As such, he could only turn a blind eye to it. If he could get by, then so be it. Speaking of which, how could 10,000 people go against an army of over 1 million people? Even if the mercenaries were strong, with a ratio of 1 to 100, they would be able to exhaust you to death. Of course, unless Yang Qindong was willing to take out the large destructive weapons in the warehouse. However, that was impossible. At least in the war with the Han people, he would not use such powerful weapons. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed more Han people to support him. How could he achieve it if he killed them? Chapter 443. Not to mention, Kuang Yi didn't know that Yang Qindong had a large warehouse and many powerful weapons from hundreds of years later. He didn't think highly of Yang Qindong just from the number of troops. Even if he believed that this army could fight, it shouldn't be like this. From his point of view, Ingzong didn't have any sincerity at all, not to mention asking for Baiming's approval. That was even more impossible. Think about it. The Southern Ming had internal strife. What did it have to do with Baiming? They couldn't wait to see a joke. In order to solve the problem, Ingzong wanted their approval to be bestowed the title of king. This was simply unrealistic. Just like when Mubin was bestowed the title of king of Shiping, why didn't he say anything to Baiming? Now that Yang Qindong was about to be bestowed the title of king, he remembered everything. If this wasn't artificial difficulties, then what was? Of course, these were all Kuang Yi's thoughts. As a subject of the Great Ming, he couldn't question the emperor's decision. Now, he was thinking about how to explain this matter to Yang Qindong clearly. He wasn't even sure if Yang Qindong would be angry and make things difficult for him if he read this decree. Others definitely wouldn't, but when it came to Yang Qindong, everything was possible. Kuang Yi couldn't make up his mind, so he called Guaning, Ma Wei, and Yu Guang over. He first showed them the emperor's decree, then asked with a helpless expression, "Do the 3 generals have any ideas?" After the 3 of them read it, their expressions became very ugly. They could clearly see that Zong didn't want to be bestowed the title of king. However, they were just some insignificant or border officials. What ideas could they have? Just like this, the three of them were silent for a long time. When Kuang Yi was a little impatient, Guanning carefully said, "Teacher, this matter should be discussed with the Duke of Loyalty and see if there are any other conditions. As for the location, I think Gaozhou City is more suitable." The reason why Guanning said this was because he had the same thought as Kuang Yi. He was also afraid that Yang Qindong would suddenly attack. It was different in the city. After all, this was their territory. Even if they wanted to make a move, the other party would have some scruples. Yes, Kuang Yi nodded. He understood Guan Ying's meaning and said, "Since that's the case, you should personally go to the mercenary camp. Regardless of whether you can meet the Duke of Loyalty or not, just tell him that you want to discuss this matter." "I understand." Guanning nodded. Cold Front Barracks. Zhu Qizhen's decision regarding Zong had been sent over yesterday. With a powerful eunuch like Mao Mu in the palace, and the fact that this matter was not a secret to begin with, he had informed the Yangxie Security Bureau personnel in the city. Yang Qindong, who had received this information a day earlier, let out a long sigh after reading it. He knew that he had underestimated the situation. He was different from Mu Bin. Yang Qindong knew this very well. Mu Bin had only lived in Yunnan for a long time, and his influence was limited there. Moreover, most of the soldiers under his command belonged to the imperial court. In other words, if he made any strange moves, those soldiers might not listen to him. However, he was different. He had the most elite mercenary army in the world. That was an existence that everyone was afraid of. In addition, when he was in Baiming, he had the ability to overthrow the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. This kind of influence was not something that a mere Mu family could achieve. It was precisely because his influence was not limited to one place that it was normal for Zhu Qizhen to be on guard against him. Under such circumstances, how could Zhu Qizhen give him the title of king? If it were someone else, if he was not given the title of king, he would withdraw his troops. In any case, his headquarters was in Baiming. Now, Baiming was still very safe. At worst, he could just return to Yang Village and do whatever he wanted with the outside world. However, Yang Qindong's goal was set long ago. He could not let go of this no matter what, especially since this war involved Jiaoji. Jiaoji was definitely a foreign race. He could not allow the foreign race to oppress and invade the Han people. In other words, regardless of whether Zong agreed to give him the title of king or not, he would not give him even the slightest benefit. If he had to send troops, he would still send troops. A bitter smile appeared on Yang Qindong's face as he felt like he was being held hostage. Then, he comforted himself and said, "Forget it. No matter what, this time I've expressed my wish. When the time is right, I'll probably be bestowed the title of king." After consoling himself, Yang Qindong began to wait for Kuang Yi to talk to him. Although he could not be bestowed the title of king, he still wanted the benefits. He could not expect him to go to war without paying anything. This wait did not take long. On the second day, Guanning came. After seeing Tiger's Mane, he told him that the minister wanted to meet with the Duke of Loyalty. He also said that he would be waiting for him in the city. Tiger's Mane naturally did not agree immediately. He only said that he would report this matter to the young master. As for whether he would go or not, it was not up to him to decide. After Guanning left, Tiger's Mane told Yang Qindong about the matter. The sixth young master laughed heartily. "This Kuang Yi is also afraid of death. He actually asked me to meet him in the city. He is afraid that I will flip out. He." Seeing that even the Minister of War was intimidated by the young master's reputation, Hu Meng naturally had a smile on his face, as if he had something to do with honor. "Well, if that is the case, how about we give him face? Not only do we have to go, but we also have to go quickly. We have to act as if we are in a hurry. Only by doing this can we get more benefits." Yang Qindong quickly made a decision. He had to act as if he did not know anything. This way, when he heard the news, he would flip out. No matter what he said or did, others would be able to understand. Yang Qindong wanted to enter the city for negotiations. Tiger's Mane immediately went to arrange it. Although there should not be any danger, at this time, the young master's safety was definitely the most important thing in Yangxia. There was no room for carelessness. He immediately gathered a total of 60 people from the first and second guards to be responsible for the young master's close safety. Then he mobilized a company of elites, the Cold Front, to be responsible for the periphery. In addition, he had the Wolf Fong Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team to secretly cooperate with him. Just like how Kuang Yu was guarding against Yang Qindong, how could they not be on guard against each other? After doing these things, Tiger's Mane reported the situation to Yang Qindong. He just nodded slightly to show that he understood and did not say anything. This was the concern of his subordinates. Of course, he had to accept it. After all, if something really happened to him, then the world would really be in chaos. When Tiger's Mane reported, as the first wife, Hu Yin was tidying up Yang Qindong's clothes. They had been married for more than a year, and Hu Yin had completed the transformation from a little girl to a qualified wife. Her behavior was more natural and graceful. From a girl in the Hu family to Yang Qindong's wife, Hu Yin did not feel too uncomfortable. Of course, this was because of Yang Qindong's protection, but at the same time, it was also because there were no parents-in-law. Without anyone to control her, she could obtain the greatest power as soon as she came in. When she did things naturally, she did not have to worry too much. It had been smooth sailing, especially after Yang Qindong treated her very well after marriage. This made Hu Yin very satisfied. Even so, she still had a regret in her heart. That was, after such a long time, she was still not pregnant with her husband's flesh and blood. In this era, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. One could imagine how much pressure she was under. If it were not for Yang Qindong repeatedly emphasizing that now was the time of war, and the environment was not conducive to having children, and if it were not for the other 3 wives who were also not pregnant, she was afraid that she would not have been able to resist. Naturally, Hu Yin did not know that the lack of children was partly caused by Yang Qindong. He did his best to take various measures in the bedroom. Of course, it was not that he did not want children, but for the sake of the wives. He remembered reading a book in his later life, which said that the best age for a woman to conceive was between the ages of 22 and 23. At that time, a woman's body was at its best. Now, none of the wives were over 20, so he was not in a hurry. Of course, if they were really pregnant by accident, he would be very happy and attach great importance to it. She carefully helped Yang Qindong put on the iconic set of green clothes and looked around. When she was sure that everything was fine, Hu Yin nodded with satisfaction. Yes, my 6th son is handsome. Haha, don't praise yourself like this. Listening to Hu Yin sigh, Yang Qindong could not help but be happy. Even if he had a calm heart, it made him very happy to be praised by the person he loved. Seeing that Yang Qindong seemed to be in a good mood, Hu Yin opened her mouth, but did not say anything. Yang Qindong saw her hesitant look. What's wrong? Is there anything that can't be said between us? Since Yang Qindong asked, Hu Yin said with some embarrassment, 6th son, it's like this. We also want to enter the city to have a look. Sister Shui has mentioned this to me twice, but considering that you have been busy, she did not mention it. Today, you enter the city and take us in to have a look. Don't worry. We know what to do and will bring guards with us. Besides, with Tai Ching Yi and the others, no one will be blind enough to provoke us. It was no wonder that Hu Yin would have such a request. After all, she was a woman who was not even 20 years old. At first, she was excited and curious about staying in the military camp every day, but after a long time, it was inevitable that she would feel bored. Therefore, a while ago, 3rd Madame Shui had asked if she could go to Gaozhou Prefecture. Considering that she did not want to cause trouble for her husband, Hu Yin refused. However, seeing that Yang Qindong was going to enter the city today, she wondered if she should go with him. After all, not only did she want to go, but so did Sister Shui. Even if it was for Sister Shui's sake, she should say this idea. Chapter 444. It's been hard on you. As soon as Hu Yin spoke, Yang Qindong understood the problem and nodded. Then let's go into the city and take a look. Tiger's Mane. Tell Tai Ching Yi and the others to prepare. Also, assign the first guard to the two madams. It's better not. Captain Tai and the others are enough. The first guard should stay by your side. Hu Yin said with a look of refusal. It's okay. The second guard has been trained long ago. Captain Dao Xiao has complained to me more than once that they have the ability to shoulder the burden alone. Now, let's give them a chance. Besides, as long as Kuang Ye's head is not kicked by a donkey, they will definitely not dare to make things difficult for me. Hearing Yang Qindong's last witty words, Hu Yin covered her mouth and chuckled. She knew that her husband was doing this for her own good and also showing his concern, so she agreed. Okay, then I will tell Sister Shui the good news and make her happy. After Hu Yin finished speaking, she really left the tent. When she left, her face was very happy. Looking at this scene, Yang Qindong could not help but sigh. It was good to be young. Yang Qindong was still very satisfied with the relationship between the madams, but he also knew that it could not be like this forever. Once they were older, their thoughts would be more mature. Once they had children, conflicts of interest would naturally appear. Once he really created something big, it would be a question of who would inherit and how much would be inherited. At that time, it would be impossible for them to be as close as they were now. But after thinking about it, Yang Qindong quickly shook his head. That was still a very distant matter. There was no need to think so much now. It was better to think about the meeting with Kuang Yi first. After receiving the information about Nanjing yesterday, Yang Qindong knew that after being disappointed, he also understood his position in Zhu Qizhen's heart. Others could be crowned king, but he could not. It seemed that Zhu Qizhen was very afraid of him. In other words, he had already formed such an impression in the other party's heart. It would be very difficult or even impossible to change it. Even if he disbanded the mercenaries now, it would only be a temporary peace. It would be impossible for him to live in peace forever. Once they seized the opportunity and created something that could be used against them, it would be the time for the army to be locked up. In the final analysis, Yang Qindong had already seen that Zhu Qizhen would not tolerate him after testing him with the king bestowment request. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to harbor any illusions. He would directly reveal his powerful side. Even if it was to protect himself, for the safety of his family and loved ones, he had to have sufficient strength. Of course, even after going through all these, Yang Qindong's strategy still hadn't changed. That was to surround them but not attack. Even though the great Ming dynasty was divided into the north and the south, the majority of the commoners still managed to get by. During the early Ming dynasty, the economy recovered and developed through the Hanwu, Jiangwen, and Yongle dynasties. During the Renzong and Xuanzong dynasties, the economy prospered. During the Mingran dynasty, they stopped purchasing and redressed grievances. They paid tribute to the commoners and shared benefits with the commoners. They ordered for the troops to be stopped and for the commoners to be raised. They also stopped the treasure ships from going to the Western Ocean and stopped the royal family from purchasing jewels. These actions eased the social conflicts and allowed the commoners to recover. Productivity was developed, opening up a stable and prosperous era. After Ming Xuanzong ascended the throne, he quickly quelled the Han King Zhu Gaoxiu's rebellion and continued the Mingran dynasty's ruling philosophy. He implemented a policy of focusing on agriculture, helping the poor, and punishing corruption. He continued to use the three yangs, helping the commoners, helping the poor, and punishing corruption. This caused the Ming dynasty to be stable and the economy to develop quickly. During their reign, the government was clear and the laws were strict. The economy developed, the commoners lived in peace, and the society was stable. It formed the peaceful scene of the early Ming dynasty. The later generations called it the rule of Renxian, which was comparable to the Zhou dynasty's rule of Changkong, the Han dynasty's rule of Wenjing, and the Tang dynasty's rule of Jingguan. If it wasn't for Zhu Zhanji passing away in the 10th year of Xuanda, 1435, he would have died at the age of 38. If the rule of Renxian ended like that, even if Yang Chendong came here and brought the large warehouse with him, it would be very difficult for him to achieve anything. Facing the great Ming dynasty, which had a strong economy and military, if Yang Chendong wanted to do something, it would be the same as going against the development of society, and he wouldn't be able to win the hearts of the people. It was because the great Ming dynasty's foundation was too good that even after the defeat of Tu Mu and the chaos in the south, the great Ming dynasty's foundation was still there. Many people were still loyal to the imperial court, especially in the hearts of the commoners. The great Ming dynasty was still very strong and was worth relying on. Under such an environment, even if Yang Chendong could take down the southern Baiming emperor and rule the imperial court, it was inevitable that the commoners would complain. There would even be many people who would rise up against him. If that was the case, then the Han people would fight amongst themselves. This was definitely not something that Yang Chendong wanted to see. He still wanted to lead them to unify the world. In the future, they would feel extremely proud to be born into a Han family. Just like the Americans in the future, they were arrogant wherever they went. In other countries, if something happened to the Americans, the local government's attention would be completely different. This was the benefit that strength brought to the commoners. Yang Chendong pursued an existence that was higher than Americans. The place that he wanted to conquer was too big, and he needed countless pure Han people to rule it. Once the consumption in the great Ming dynasty was too great, even if he had the territory, there would be no reliable people to manage it. With this, he couldn't start a civil war in the great Ming dynasty's territory, where the Han people lived for a long time. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong shook his head lightly. He believed that Zhu Qizhen definitely didn't know about his thoughts. Not only him, but other people also didn't know. They didn't even dare to think about it. However, it was undeniable that although Zhu Qizhen didn't know what he was thinking, this kind of pressure made him unable to fight back and could only admit defeat. Of course, while helplessly admitting defeat, Yang Chendong also had to actively ask for benefits. As long as it wasn't too excessive, the other party would definitely agree. Since they wanted him to work hard, it would be unreasonable to not give him any benefits. Young master, everything is ready. We can set off. Tiger's Mane once again entered the tent to ask for instructions. Let's go. Yang Chendong agreed and strode out of the tent. Gaozhou City. Although there were nearly 70,000 Miao soldiers stationed not far from the city, order in the city was still carried out in an orderly manner under Kuang Yi and the others' appeasement. This was the advantage of having a capable minister. For example, Kuang Yi, although he was the minister of war, but in fact his ability to manage the area was very strong. This kind of all-round talent was also what the emperor liked. If he met a famous monarch, there would be more room for development. Speaking of which, if it wasn't for Kuang Yi being too old and his thinking being too rigid, even Yang Chendong would have wanted to tie him up and send him to Qiqian City to be modified for his own use. Under the city tower of Gaozhou City, the city gate was opened. It was no longer closed like before. However, unlike before, when the city gate was opened, the citizens couldn't casually leave the city. There were only a few Ming soldiers guarding here. Along with them were Kuang Yi, Guaning, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and the others. The reason they appeared here was naturally to welcome Yang Chendong. When they saw the army in camouflage from afar, Kuang Yi and the others tidied up their official robes and looked forward with anticipation. This time, although Yang Chendong's wish of being named king did not come true, this did not affect Kuang Ye's view of him. In their hearts, if there was anyone who could resolve the crisis in the southwest of the southern Ming Empire, it would definitely be Yang Chendong. However, the emperor did not agree to being named king. As the minister of war, Kuang Yi could only obey. While taking advantage of today's opportunity to send the imperial edict, he also hoped to persuade Yang Chendong to focus on the overall situation. Even if the emperor didn't promise him, if he had a good performance, it might not be impossible for him to be crowned as a prince. Of course, even Kuang Yi himself did not have confidence in such a conversation. Even though he was the Minister of War and had the position of Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince, a lower rank one official, when he saw the iconic luxurious carriage arrive, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Although Yang Qindong was only 21 years old, in Kuang Ye's heart, he was someone of the same generation. This was because this person was too smart. When discussing matters with such a person, it was better to avoid all petty tricks. It was better to be more sincere and perhaps get a good result. The luxurious carriage was getting closer and closer. When it was 300 meters away from Gaozhou City's gate, a company of elites had already rushed forward and took over the city's defense. After discovering that there was no danger, they made a gesture to signal that it was safe. Then, the luxurious carriage continued forward until it arrived in front of Kuang Yi and the others. When Kuang Yi saw how careful Yang Qindong was, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He knew that this was not because Yang Qindong was afraid that he would set a trap. Yang Qindong just wanted to use this method to tell him that their relationship was not as close as before. Even if he wanted to make a request, he should have some sense of propriety. In the end, the carriage stopped in front of Kuang Yi and the others. Then, the tall beta Persei stretched out and opened the carriage's curtains. Then, Yang Qindong, dressed in green, walked out. Compared to the Yang Qindong he saw a while ago, this time, his complexion was much rosier, and he seemed to be more energetic. Of course, it was not comparable to when he was at his best. But the more he looked like he had just recovered from serious illness, the more it could be used as proof that he had indeed been seriously ill before. Chapter 445. Congratulations, Duke Zhongdang's body seems to be much better. Seeing Yang Qindong walk out of the carriage in such a state, Kuang Yi cupped his fist and laughed, wanting to use this opportunity to get closer to him. That's right. It's all thanks to the mercy of the Imperial Secret Service. Otherwise, I'm afraid this duke would be long gone from this world. Yang Qindong didn't laugh. Instead, he replied very seriously. As soon as he said this, the faces of Guan Ying and the others on the opposite side changed greatly, becoming extremely red. Yang Qindong was poisoned by the embroidered uniform guard. This was something that the deceased embroidered uniform guard, Wei Guang, had personally admitted. Therefore, even if Yang Qindong's words were like nails, Guan Ying and the others had no right to object. They could only lower their heads and not say a word. Fortunately, Kuang Yi was still there. This good official of several dynasties, his ability to adapt was quite strong. He said with a serious face, "This old man has already reported to the emperor about the embroidered uniform guard's audacity to secretly harm a meritorious official. The embroidered uniform guard has already been punished, and a few of them have been removed from their positions. This can be considered the emperor giving justice to Duke Zhongdang." This matter was not something that Kuang Yi was talking nonsense. It really happened. However, only Zhu Qizhen himself knew whether those who had been removed from their positions had truly lost their power or if they were just putting on an act. Yang Qindong, who also received the news, heard Kuang Ye's words. His originally serious face had a trace of smile. Then he cupped his fist towards the direction of Nanjing and said, "Then this duke thanks the emperor for his kindness." There was not much respect in his words. If there were other eunuchs present, it would be inevitable for them to scold him. However, in Kuang Ye's eyes, all of this could not be more normal. He had suffered a little grievance, and he was not happy to say a few words to vent it. As long as Yang Qindong was happy and was willing to help the southern Ming Empire, which was in dire straits, it didn't matter how harsh the words were. Furthermore, Yang Qindong hadn't even said anything. He was just being a little disrespectful. Speaking of which, the word respect should be kept in one's heart and not spoken out loud. Who did not know how to say nice words? Would words like that really count? Kuang Yi had his own judgment, so at this moment, he did not show anything. Instead, he generously made a gesture to the people behind him. Yang Qindong did not stand on ceremony and walked side by side with Kuang Yi. The two of them chatted and laughed as they walked towards the capital of Gaozhou. Naturally, There were hundreds of elites of Lung Feng following behind him. This time, for the sake of safety, Tiger's Mane allowed each of them to bring 2 basic sets of ammunition, which was 400 rounds per person. In addition, there were 5,000 to 6,000 rounds of ammunition in total. With such strength, even if the Southern Ming army in the city wanted to do something bad, they would not be able to get any benefits. Not to mention, Yang Qindong had a large warehouse in his hands. How many rounds of ammunition and advanced weapons could he not take out? They entered the city, followed by Hu Yin and Lady Shui in the luxurious carriage. Tai Qingyi, the captain of the guards, led 20 female soldiers and the first guard, Qiu V's team of 30 people, a total of 50 guards, into the city. With such a team, as long as they did not encounter a large-scale enemy, there would not be any safety issues. Once something happened, as long as they could hold on for a short while, reinforcements would arrive immediately, and their safety would be guaranteed. As women, they naturally liked rouge and face powder very much. As Yang Qindong's wives, they already had all kinds of new cosmetics that could not be seen outside, provided by the cosmetics factory in Xian City. However, since they were used to shopping in rouge shops since they were young, since they entered the city, it was necessary for them to make a trip there. It was just like how many people were used to eating big fish and big meat. So it was not bad to have a few light side dishes occasionally. Gaozhou Prefecture had experienced the chaos of the Huang bandits and was now surrounded by the Miao army. It was impossible to say that the business was not affected at all, just like the current Gaozhou Prefecture city. Because it was too troublesome to transport things in from the outside world, it caused the prices of goods in the city to skyrocket. Even businesses like rouge shops that weren't absolutely necessary were greatly affected. The prices were more than 4 to 5 times higher than normal, causing many young ladies and madams in the city to be unable to patronize them. However, this was not a problem for Hu Yin and Lady Shui. Along the way, Yang Qindong had instructed Lung Feng to take anything that didn't belong to anyone. He wasn't courteous at all. Although Zhu Qijin did not give them a single coin for military expenses, just by eliminating the Huang bandits, they had already robbed a lot of spoils of war. For example, when Gao Xiong left with the navy last time, just the gold and silver alone was more than 15 million taels, and this did not include the house deeds, land deeds, and some antiques and paintings. It was impossible for them to take all the money away. Yang Qindong had a lot of gold and silver with him. As a madam, it was not a problem for him to be generous. That was why Hu Yin and Madame Shui dared to step into the store. After the 2 madams entered the rouge shop, Qiu Vi and 30 guards completely controlled the entire street outside the shop to ensure that no one came to disturb the 2 madams. Not only the front door of the rouge shop was guarded, but the back door was also guarded. Badeo Jiang and Peng Yu of the first guard team were arranged to guard here. Although they were not protecting the 6th young master this time, the 2 madams' identities were equally important. Badeo Jiang and Peng Yu did not have the slightest intention of relaxing. When they arrived at the back door of the rouge shop, they saw a black shadow seem to have floated in. The reason why they said that the shadow had floated in was because the person was so fast that Peng Yu did not see it clearly. He did not even know if it was an illusion in front of his eyes. What kind of person was Peng Yu? He grew up in the mountains and dealt with all kinds of wild beasts. After many years of hunting, he was very sensitive to danger. Brother Ba, did you see a shadow enter the backyard just now? Peng Yu was not sure if he saw a person or not, so he cautiously asked Badeo Jiang, who was in charge of guarding the back door with him. Badeo Jiang was good at endurance, especially when it came to fist techniques. However, when it came to eyesight, he was still not good enough. In response to Peng Yu's question, he asked in confusion, "Why do you say that? Did you see anything?" After these days of contact, they understood each other very well and knew where Peng Yu's advantages were. After saying that, Badeo Jiang's expression changed. "Brother Peng, are you going to say that you saw someone enter the shop from the back door? It was a little blurry. I didn't see it clearly." Peng Yu, who was asked, answered in an uncertain tone. "You didn't see it clearly? Does that mean someone went in?" Badeo Jiang was a straightforward person. Thinking of his responsibility, he immediately turned around and rushed into the back door after saying that. Brother Ba, I'm not sure if it's the same person. Peng Yu saw Badeo Zhang's eagerness and could not help but shout anxiously. What he saw was Badeo Zhang's back and his voice coming from afar. Mistress's safety is more important than anything. It's not wrong to go in and have a look whether or not someone is there. After shouting these words, Badeo Zhang's figure was getting farther and farther away. Peng Yu did not think about anything else. He put the 9-5 style behind him and strode after him. After Hu Yin and Madame Shui entered, the rouge shop quickly became lively, especially when Tai Qingyi entered with 20 valiant female soldiers in camouflage uniforms. Seeing this, the proprietress of the shop came out to welcome them. Most of the people who ran the rouge shop were women. Otherwise, it would be inconvenient to communicate with them. The proprietress of the shop was a woman in her 40s. Looking at her complexion, one could tell that she must have been beautiful when she was young. Oh, our esteemed guest has arrived. Apologies for not going out to meet you. Take a good look. Our Lu's Rouge shop is an old brand. It's one of the best in the entire Gaozhou prefecture. The lady boss had a smile on her face as she spoke as if they were close friends. Hu Yin and Lady Shui were used to big occasions, so they didn't have any stage fright. They smiled and went to the counter under the guidance of the landlady. Then, they looked at the colorful makeup products. Tai Qingyi followed the two matriarchs closely and looked around from time to time. However, just as he took 2 steps forward, he heard a female soldier reprimanding him. "Who are you? Get out!" Just this shout alone attracted at least 3 nearby female soldiers to come over. Even though they were all women, they had all undergone strict training in Crimson City. The one who trained with them was the most elite, Lung Feng. Therefore, their skills were not any weaker than Lung Feng's. It was just that their strength was lacking. Under the shout, an unprepossessing man had already pulled out a sharp dagger from his waist and rushed in the direction of the counter. The man's speed was very fast, and his strength was even greater. Just by getting close to her, he had already pushed the female soldier who had first noticed him and called out to him to the side. When the flying figure landed, it directly smashed a wooden chair that was meant for guests to rest on into smithereens. However, what the man did not expect was that after he pushed one person away, another woman rushed in from the front, left, and right. Instantly, the situation became 1 against 3. Women? Why are there so many women? He spoke awkwardly in the Central Plains language. Then, he raised his knife and slashed at the 3 women in front of him. All of this happened too quickly. The 3 female soldiers were caught off guard. The saber slashed the arm of one of the female soldiers, causing a stream of blood to spurt out. Chapter 446. With one successful move, the man flew up and kicked at the other female soldier. He thought it would be easy for him to hurt another person with his quick kick. However, he didn't expect that the person in front of him would move. His kick missed, and because he used too much strength, he almost fell to the ground. Taking advantage of his movement, the 3 female soldiers, together with the female soldier whose arm was injured, surrounded him again. It seemed that they would never let him take a step forward. At such a close distance, it was not a wise move to fire a gun. It was easy to hurt their companions. So, the 3 women used their fists and feet. They cooperated with each other and surrounded the man in the middle. Their fists and feet were like raindrops as they smashed towards the center. At this moment, another 4 female soldiers rushed in from the side, as if they were going to help the 3 women. The other 13 female soldiers and Captain Tai Qingyi surrounded Hu Yin and Madame Shui tightly to protect them. The fight in the store soon attracted the attention of Captain Qiu Vi, who was guarding the front door. At this moment, he had already rushed in through the front door with 4 sturdy guards and stepped into the Rouge store. The timely appearance of Qiu Vi and the others made the man, who had been punched and kicked countless times, lose all hope of assassinating them. He had thought that the success rate of killing 2 women would be very high. However, It seemed that he had underestimated them. Since that was the case, he decided to run away. Where there was life, there was hope. Once the man had made up his mind, he decisively swung the dagger in front of him and threw it toward the counter. This alerted the enemy and caused the 7 female guards surrounding him to rush toward the counter. They would not forget that there were 2 matriarchs there. The dagger flew through the air like an arrow. However, just as it was about to reach the counter, Tai Chingy jumped up and grabbed it in midair. His voice was heard before his body landed on the ground. "Go after him. Don't let him escape." Only then did the 7 female soldiers stop and turn around, wanting to give chase. However, after 2 breaths of time, the man was nowhere to be seen. Just when they thought that the assassin would definitely run far away, with a muffled bang, a figure flew back from the side door. After taking a closer look, who else could it be if it wasn't the assassin just now? After landing on the ground, the killer looked pained. Obviously, he was beaten back, and the person who hit him was so strong that he lost his strength for a moment. As soon as he landed on the ground, he wanted to stand up and fight, but 2 steel blades, flashing with white light, were already placed on his neck. Then, a sharp pain suddenly came from the bend of his calf, accompanied by a very light crack sound. The person who kicked him was Chiu Vi, the captain of the first guard. Needless to say, his entire left calf was crippled by this kick. Chou Wu led his men to restrain the assassin. It was at this moment that Badeo Jiang and Peng Yu appeared from the side door. Clearly, it was because of their timely arrival that the assassin was forced to retreat and heavily injured to the ground. Seeing that Ba Dao River's Peng Yu had also come out, Captain Chou Wu nodded his head approvingly. Clearly, he was very satisfied with their performance. Then, he looked around with a serious expression and said, "It's dangerous here. Let's get out of the city first and send a signal to the outside." After Chiu Vi said that, Tai Chingy led a group of female guards to cover Hu Yin and Madame Shui and walked out of the roof shop. The landlady and the 3 waitresses in the shop were also carried out by the other guards. 2 guards escorted the killer, who had lost the ability to move his left leg, out of the Lou's Rouge shop. However, just as the other guards were approaching them, suddenly, an arrow pierced through the air. Out of instinct, Chiu Vi shouted, "Protect the madam!" Then, he led the others toward Hu Yin and Madame Shui. As it turned out, it was a false alarm. The arrow was not aimed at anyone else, but at the assassin. Because he was not prepared, the arrow hit him in the chest. In just a breath, the wounded killer died with black blood flowing out of his 7 orifices. The arrow is poisonous. Be careful, everyone. After Chou Wu stepped forward to take a look, his pupils suddenly shrank. Then, he shouted to the people around him. While protecting the 2 matriarchs, he pulled out a small pistol in his right hand and suddenly fired at the sky. The government office of Gaozhou Prefecture. This was where Kuang Yi was staying, as well as the place where he and Yang Qindong were discussing matters. When they arrived, Kuang Yi smiled and invited Yang Qindong into a small study room. They closed the door and cut off all contact with the outside world. There were no outsiders in the room. Kuang Yi's smile disappeared and was replaced by a look of guilt. He cupped his fist and said to Yang Qindong, "Duke Zhongwei, I am so incompetent. The emperor has sent a decree, but he did not immediately agree to confer you the title of king. Lord Kuang, what is the meaning of this? Please don't be like this. This duke is unable to accept it." Kuang Yi was so respectful towards Yu Jia. Most likely, he was only respectful towards Ingzong. Yang Qindong, who had just sat down, quickly stood up and held Kuang Yi's arm. Kuang Yi let out a long sigh and said, "Loyal Duke, this old man has let you down. Don't say that. This is the emperor's will and has nothing to do with you. But what's going on? Can you tell me clearly?" Yang Qindong let out a long sigh, pretending that it was the first time he had received the news. This, Kuang Yi first revealed a troubled expression, then stomped his foot and said, "Forget it. There are some things that cannot be avoided even if you want to. This old man will explain it to the loyal duke." Kuang Yi seemed to have gathered a lot of courage and told Ingzong about the emperor's decree. especially when he talked about how important the title of king was and how he had to inform Bai Ming and get their approval. His tone became even more serious. The reason why Kuang Yi did this was to give Yang Chendong hope. A person can only do things well when there is hope in their eyes. If he really couldn't see any future, who knew what unimaginable things he would do? Now that Kuang Yi said this, how could Yang Chendong not understand what he meant? With regards to such words of comfort, not to mention himself, even the other party probably wouldn't believe it. He couldn't help but bitterly smile. Minister Kuang, I am calling you Uncle Kuang. Do you believe what you just said? Kuang Yi, who was still lowering his head and playing the pity card, suddenly heard Yang Chendong call him uncle. He felt that something was wrong. Then, he heard Yang Chendong say, "Do you believe it yourself?" His face turned red, and he didn't know what to say. Seeing that Kuang Yi was speechless, Yang Chendong's expression turned gloomy. He continued, "After defeating the Huang bandit army, all the generals were promoted and received benefits. May I ask if this has anything to do with me?" Kuang Yi's expression became even more unnatural. In this matter, Ingzong was indeed in the wrong. Seeing that Kuang Yi did not respond, Yang Chendong continued, "With the empty position of an imperial envoy, I will let it go. If you don't give me a single grain of military pay, I will not quibble. Even if you don't give me any rewards, I can endure it. However, after defeating the Huang bandit army and delivering Huang Yuliang's head, not only did the emperor remove me from my position as imperial envoy, he also ordered the mercenaries to leave immediately and sent a large army to watch over us. May I ask, even if you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, isn't this action too fast? If Minister Kuang was in my position, how would he explain this to my brother, the leader of the mercenaries? Ask me." Each question was like a bolt of lightning that smashed into Kuang Yi's heart like a hammer. He was speechless, and his face turned red. Sigh. Yang Chendong didn't point at Kuang Yi to answer his questions. Even if Zhu Qizhen was here, he would probably keep his mouth shut. After using up the mercenaries, they found that the king of Min's faction in Yunnan was very powerful. They asked us to work for them, but we didn't get any benefits. Even if I could figure it out, how could I explain it to the mercenaries? Would they be able to think it through? Don't say anymore. Kuang Yi finally spoke. Then, he slowly raised his head and looked at Yang Chendong with a pair of expectant eyes. The emperor has wronged you. But no matter what, the Southern Ming Empire is weak now. Please help us. Thinking about it, Master Yang has assisted several generations of Ming emperors. You have wholeheartedly served the country and the emperor. Kuang Yi wanted to play the emotional card. However, he thought his method was correct. He didn't know that when he mentioned this, Yang Chendong became even angrier. Are you talking about my father? If others don't know, may I ask Minister Kuang, why did my father retire and return to his hometown? Why did he die on the way back? He racked his brains for decades for the Great Ming, but he didn't even want to return home to retire. If he was in heaven, he probably wouldn't think it was worth it. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, Kuang Yi's eyes flashed. He didn't expect that Yang Chendong was still defending his father. If this was the case, then the problem was serious. As one of the three Yangs, Yang Rong assisted several emperors of the Great Ming and was finally appointed as Master Yang. It could be said that he was a high-ranking official. However, with the rise of the eunuchs, especially the suppression of Wang Zhen's faction, he died on the way back. How could there not be a reason for his disappointment? Chapter 447. Because of this matter, Kuang Yi felt that it was unfair, but he only thought about it in his heart. After all, even if it was him, if he offended Wang Zhen, he would not have a good ending. However, so many years had passed after all. He originally thought that Yang Chendong would have forgotten about it, but now it seemed that he was still his son. How could he dare to forget about his father's matter? In that case, could it be that this person's resentment towards the Great Ming dynasty ran so deep? If that was the case, then things would be difficult to handle. Some thoughts, once born, would be like demons haunting one's body. It was difficult to get rid of them. Kuang Yi's expression changed again and again. He was still trying to analyze what Yang Chendong wanted to do. But at this moment, the sixth young master Yang spoke again. Forget it. That was a long time ago. Let's not talk about it. But Minister Kuang, do you think I will repeat my father's old path? Yang Chendong's face was very serious, which made Kuang Yi's heart tremble. Old path. Could it be that when one was old, one would be ostracized, oppressed, or even leave helplessly and die in a foreign land? This was probably an outcome that no one wanted to see. Thinking about it carefully, although Zhu Qizhen did not persecute Yang Rong with Wang Zhen, he really did not help much. He only carried out the slogan of not being punished. It was like this in the past. Now that Yang Chendong had become so powerful and feared, how would he be treated when he lost his power? It was no wonder that Yang Chendong wanted to be conferred the title of king. After all, if he really became a king with a different surname, it meant that he would have more protection. For example, he could build a king's residence according to the rules and even have his own guards. Perhaps this way, he would be safer. Every man for himself, and the heavens take the hindmost. Yang Chendong thought about the future when he was powerful. This was called scheming and astute, which was very normal. But facing such a question, Kuang Yi did not know how to answer. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't want him to answer. He just asked a question. Through this matter, he wanted to tell Kuang Yi why he wanted to be king. It wasn't because he was ambitious, but because he wanted to find a guarantee. All right, Minister Qi, let's not talk about these issues. Since His Majesty has begun to seriously consider it and has contacted His Majesty Biming, what's wrong with me waiting for news? But it doesn't seem to be enough to make the mercenaries work hard. Of course, Kuang Yi knew that this so-called serious consideration was nothing more than a pretense to give an answer to Yang Chendong's request. But in fact, it was impossible for this matter to pass. No matter if it was Ing Zong or Dai Zong, they wouldn't want to see the rise of a king with a different surname. He believed that Yang Chendong must be able to see through this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have achieved so much in such a short period of time. The reason why he said this was just because he saw through it and didn't say it out loud. This was a smart person. As for the next mention that it wasn't enough, Kuang Yi knew that the other party was a little moved, or he wanted to continue to make more contributions and save more capital. He also answered this sentence very happily. Of course, it isn't just these. If Minister Qi has any request, you can put forward it. As long as it is within this old man's ability, I will definitely speak to His Majesty. Well, then let's see the sincerity first. As far as I know, Songjiang Prefecture, in history, there is a saying, first Songjiang Prefecture, then Shanghai Bund. Songjiang Prefecture is the predecessor of Shanghai, originally had a shipyard, but it is now idle. There are many ships that have been in the water, as well as those that have not been in the water yet. There are also many iron, ore, and steel there. Now, there's not much use for them to be placed there. It just so happens that the mercenaries need these. I have also received news from the mercenary leader that they want to get these things. This should not be a problem. The Ming Dynasty banned the sea. Regarding this policy, although after Zhu Qizhen went to Nanjing and became the emperor of the Southern Ming Dynasty, there was already news that he wanted to remove this restriction. After all, there were still many opportunities at sea. Especially in the past, the Great Ming Dynasty's navigation industry was very developed. Once it was opened, it would bring a lot of benefits to the Southern Ming Dynasty. If it weren't for the sudden outbreak of war in the south, the problem would have been solved by now. The timing of Yang Chendong's suggestion was extremely accurate, which also made it impossible for Kuang Yi to refuse. What's wrong? You didn't agree to his request before and used all kinds of reasons to delay it. Now that he said that he wants something that you don't want, you still have the nerve to refuse? If this is also fine, then don't ask him for help if you have any problems in the future. Mutual assistance was the key. It was the key to sustainable development. Only giving without any return, this kind of relationship wouldn't last long. Kuang Yi only thought about it in his mind and nodded. I can't give an answer now, but it shouldn't be a big problem. In short, this old man will do his best. That's good. Let's wait for this matter to be done. After the mercenaries can pull the steel from Songjiang Prefecture, then let's talk about how to deal with the current situation. When Yang Chendong heard Kuang Ye's words, he knew that the matter was mostly done. He relaxed his body and leaned back on the wooden chair behind him. That's natural. It's just that the current situation seems to be extremely unfavorable to us. If it's possible, if the mercenaries take action a day earlier, I'm afraid that we can save many people from the abyss of suffering. Kuang Yi thought about whether he could persuade Yang Chendong to take action first. At least, he could stand out and attract attention and relieve the pressure of the southern Ming dynasty's army. It was just that Yang Chendong saw through such a scheme at a glance. Minister Kuei, the mercenaries don't belong to me. That's right. Then I will immediately report the situation here to the emperor. If it's urgent, it shouldn't take long for the news to come back. Kuang Yi was reminded that this matter was brought up by the leader of the mercenaries. If it wasn't resolved, would the mercenaries take action easily? Even if it was Yang Chendong, he would not have the strength to do so. Of course, Kuang Yi wouldn't think that the real leader of the mercenaries was Yang Chendong. Firstly, the other party was too young. Whether it was Bai Ming or the Southern Ming dynasty, they had investigated his past and didn't find anything strange about him. Secondly, the mercenaries were too powerful, especially when they had extremely advanced firearms in their hands. How could such things be created by a young man? Although it was ridiculous to say that saving a life could command the mercenaries, no smart person would believe it. Most likely, someone wanted to borrow Yang Chendong's hand to make the mercenaries famous. But in the end, putting the young master of the Yang family in the position of the leader of the mercenaries was also unbelievable. No one would believe that the title of the leader of the mercenaries was real and had the greatest deterrence. Now that he wanted something in the name of this person, how could Kuang Yi dare to be careless and bargain? He had already decided in his heart that after Yang Chendong left, he would immediately write a secret letter to the emperor. Moreover, he had to go quickly and show the leader of the mercenaries that they were very efficient. This would definitely be beneficial for future cooperation. After everything was done, if he could send people to the mercenaries' headquarters to learn and even buy the advanced firearms in the mercenaries' hands, he wouldn't have to worry about the Great Ming dynasty not being unified. He wouldn't have to worry about the provocation and harassment of the surrounding small countries. While Kuang Yi was still thinking about these things and even making plans for a beautiful future, he suddenly heard the faint sound of a gunshot. Then, a dazzling beam of light shot up into the sky. Even during the day, he could still vaguely see the dazzling scene of flying into the sky. The signal flare that Xiu Vi shot was not a crude thing made by the newly developed ordnance stone in Qiqin City, nor was it a rudimentary toy made during the Republic of China or the war. It was a product made during the heyday of the military after the founding of the People's Republic of China. It represented the high-tech products of the 21st century. The quality of the signal flare was also very powerful. Once it was shot out, it was impossible for the nearby people not to see it. It was precisely because of its power that when it flew into the sky, not only did the Cold Vanguard Army, who had been on guard outside the city, see it, even Yang Chendong, who was discussing matters in the city, saw it immediately. Bang! Just as the signal flare rose into the sky, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Then the door was kicked open from the outside. Tiger Man and Beta Persei each carried a pitch-black Type 95 pistol and rushed into the room. "Young master, are you okay? Our brothers are dealing with the people outside." Tiger Man first looked carefully at Yang Chendong as soon as he came in. When he found that the young master was fine, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then he stood in front of Yang Chendong as if he wanted to hurt the young master and kill him first. Beta Persei was even more direct. He strode forward, grabbed Kuang Ye's collar, and lifted him up. When his feet were in the air and he felt that it was difficult to breathe, Kuang Yi, whose face was flushed, shouted in dissatisfaction, "What are you doing? Put me down, put me down." No matter what, he was still the dignified Minister of War. Now that he had the title of Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince, he was a well-known lower first-rank official. Even the entire Southern Ming dynasty, he was one of the most powerful people. Now that he was lifted up by someone, it was a psychological blow, not to mention how he felt. Put Minister Chung down first. Yang Shandong had already thought of many things in this short period of time. Since the signal flare rose into the sky, it couldn't be unintentional. Something urgent must have happened. However, it didn't seem likely that it was related to Kuang Yi. If that was the case, why didn't he see any executioners in this room? As long as an old man like Kuang Yi was here with him, even if he had just been cured of the poison, he wouldn't be a weak person. Was Kuang Yi that bold? Chapter 448. Yang Shandong didn't believe that Kuang Yi had anything to do with this. At the very least, he shouldn't have been involved. That was why he asked Beta Persei to put Kuang Yi down. With Yang Shandong's order, Beta Persei reluctantly put Kuang Yi down. Kuang Yi coughed violently after he was released. Speaking of which, Yang Ye's strength was really great. That grab just now didn't have the slightest intention of being lenient. If he hadn't let go in time, it was likely that he would have suffocated to death in just a moment. After a series of violent coughs, Kuang Yi, whose face was still a little red, asked angrily, "What are you trying to do?" Kuang Yi only shouted angrily. He didn't ask too much because he realized that something was wrong. If Yang Qindong really wanted to harm him, he could have done it the moment he entered the room. Why did he have to talk for so long, to the point that the matter was basically settled before he acted? He felt that there must be some kind of misunderstanding. "What are we trying to do? Let's see what your men do first," Yang Qindong retorted. Although he respected Kuang Yi and some of the things he did, when it came to matters of life and death, he wouldn't hesitate to kill. "My subordinates." Kuang Yi fell silent after saying this. Naturally, he didn't have the slightest ill will towards Yang Qindong, especially when he still needed to ask for help. He wouldn't have any other thoughts. However, he couldn't control what his men wanted to do. If someone disobeyed him and wanted to do something, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be able to do it. At least before he figured out what was going on, he didn't dare to make any promises. Kuang Yi didn't say anything, so Yang Qindong didn't ask. Instead, he calmly sat back in his chair and looked outside. He believed that since there was a chance to send a signal, it shouldn't be too urgent. He just had to wait for the news. As long as he was fine, the Yang family army wouldn't be in a mess, and there wouldn't be any big trouble. Yang Qindong quickly sat down with a calm look on his face. This gave Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei a backbone, and they were no longer as flustered as before. Although Kuang Yi didn't sit down, he had temporarily regained his freedom. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Not to mention other things, just this calmness alone was something that no young man could do. While they were waiting, the outside gradually quieted down. From the beginning to the end, not a single Ming soldier or general rushed over. From this point on, Kuang Yi sighed in his heart. How could he not? With his experience, he could guess that his subordinates had been subdued. Or else, why would no one care about him, the powerful minister of the Ministry of War? Report. In less than a cup of tea's time, someone finally appeared outside the room in the inner courtyard. This person was no stranger to Yang Qindong. It was Ba Daojiang, who had joined the first guard squad not long ago. "What's the matter? Speak." As soon as he saw Ba Daojiang, Yang Qindong frowned. He knew that the first guard squad was assigned to protect his two wives today. Could it be that something had happened to them? Unconsciously, Yang Qindong's right fist suddenly clenched. He swore that no matter who it was, if anyone dared to have ideas about his wives or hurt them, even if it was related to the Southern Ming Emperor, he would never forgive them. Even if he was still not strong enough, even if he had limited military strength, insufficient population, and some of the foundations were not well established, he would still go crazy. Yang Qindong had the existence of a large warehouse. If he was forced into a corner, he would show everyone what a real cannon was, what a human meat grinder tank was, and what a high-altitude plane was. Yang Qindong's anger was conveyed through his tone. Ba Daojiang, who was half kneeling on the ground, felt a chill run down his spine. Recently, he was fortunate enough to become a member of the 1st Guard Squad and had more opportunities to interact with the 6th young master. It was because of this that this person who was younger than him always gave him the impression that he was very kind. It was hard for him to get angry, and even if the sky fell, he would not change his expression. However, now that he was so angry, it was as if he was a completely different person. But Daojiang's mind could not help but be in a mess. However, after all, he had been in the Jianghu for so many years, so he still had the basic skills to calm himself down. More importantly, he was now one of the 6th young master's men, and he was the kind that was fully trusted. With that in mind, Ba Daojiang tried his best to remain calm. Then, he recounted what happened in and outside Lu Shi's rouge shop. Assassination. Fortunately, they were fine. After hearing this, Yang Qindong heaved a sigh of relief. However, his tone was still strict. Are the 2 madams safe now? Has the army entered the city? Replying to the 6th young master, the madams are very safe. They are under several layers of protection and will not be in any danger. 1st Battalion Commander Wu Sheng has already led the army into the city and is taking over the city's defense. Ba Daojiang reported what he saw along the way, as well as what Captain Xiu Vi had told him. Unexpectedly, just as he said this, Kuang Yi suddenly spoke. That's impossible. I didn't hear any killing. The city's defense is also so tight. How did your army enter the city? Kuang Yi naturally did not believe it. This time, he had been very careful when he summoned Yang Qindong for a meeting. The generals below were also afraid that Yang Qindong would flip out, so they had arranged everything beforehand. After Yang Qindong and the others entered the city, they had tightened the defense. General Yu Guang was personally standing on the city wall to prevent any accidents from happening. There were also hundreds of Ming Dynasty soldiers with him. They were already prepared and had a large number of people. How could they be taken down so easily? The key was that there was no sound of movement. This was something unimaginable. Kuang Yi did not believe it. Yang Qindong was unwavering. Since Ba Daojiang dared to say this, he must have seen something with his own eyes. As for whether or not they could complete this mission, he was not worried at all. During this period of time, the Lung Feng soldiers did not have any specific training. Their goal and mission was to quickly attack the city. When the chains and climbing ropes were taken out, the Gaozhou prefecture, which was not very sturdy to begin with, was not much different from their own backyard. Yang Qindong knew why the Lung Feng soldiers were called elites and how powerful they were. He did not doubt the report. His anxious heart finally relaxed, and his expression returned to its original natural state. All right, you've worked hard. Let's wait here together. Yes, Ba Daojiang replied respectfully. He took out the black 9.5 style from his back and stared at the door. He looked like a door god who could stop 10,000 men from entering the door. It was an awe-inspiring sight. No one answered him from the beginning to the end. Kuang Yi, who was bored, finally sat down obediently. However, there was a hint of worry in his expression. He could tell that the scout who came to report would not lie. If that was the case, wouldn't his soldiers be too useless? This time, they waited for a little longer, but in less than an hour, the footsteps outside began to become more frequent. Then, a few officers in camouflage uniforms with pistols on their belts walked in. The leader was the commander of the 2nd Lung Feng Regiment, Luo Pe. Behind him was the commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Sheng. Because Kuang Yi was there, Luo Pe did not bow. He only gave a standard military salute and said, "Commander, everything outside is under control. The 4 gates in the city are also locked down. We're searching for the assassin's accomplices. There is no news yet. Let's go out and take a look." Yang Qindong nodded slightly to show that he understood. He then said to Kuang Yi, who was still in shock, "Minister Cheng, shall we go and take a look?" Although this was a negotiating tone, Kuang Yi knew that if he didn't go, he was afraid that he would be forced into a fight. Moreover, he really wanted to know who wanted to assassinate Yang Qindong's wife and bring him such trouble. "Let's go take a look. If the assassin is my subordinate, I will definitely give the Duke of Loyalty a satisfactory answer." Kuang Ye's words were very smooth. It was obvious that he had made up his mind. If the person who did this was really his subordinate who made the decision without permission, then he really didn't mind killing a few people to satisfy his appetite. Yang Chendong wanted Kuang Ye's attitude. Just like how Kuang Yi could not fall out with him, he did not want to fall out with Kuang Yi either. Following Yang Chendong, Kuang Yi and the others walked out of the room. When they arrived at the outer courtyard, they saw Guan Ying, Ma Wei, and the others with bruises all over their faces. They were tied up like dumplings and pressed to the ground. Judging from their clothes, they were covered in dust, and Guan Ying's lapel was in tatters. They must have gone through an intense resistance. It was just that they were helpless. They were not as strong as others and would eventually be trampled under their feet. When Kuang Yi walked out, Guan Ying and the others who were still struggling to turn their heads instantly became obedient. This was too shameful. This was especially true for Guan Ying. The last time he fought with Yang Yi, he was beaten quite badly. However, he thought that it was just a special case. If he encountered ordinary mercenaries with his skills, it would be easy for him to fight against 3 or 4 of them. But just now, he was only facing a mercenary. He was still suppressed and beaten until he was pressed to the ground and could not move. Both of them were alone, yet he had easily dealt with him. It was no wonder that he felt ashamed to face anyone. Of course, if he knew that his opponent's name was Dao Xiao, he would not be so depressed. He was the captain of the second guard team. For Yang Chendong to be able to make them responsible for his safety, one could only imagine how strong they were. Although Guan Ying was powerful, the intensity and method of training were completely different from the mercenaries. It was normal for him to be defeated. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.